What happened under Stalin was evil, okay? Chernobyl was a bad mess up, okay? It was an oopsie, okay? It was an oopsie. It was an oopsie. Like, the Nazis were worse than the Soviets, but the Soviets were also very bad. I'd argue they were way better than America, then we're just on two completely different planets. He said that the bombing of the Crimean Bridge was a terror bombing. Okay, let's see. Let's watch this debate that Vaush just had. Is this it? Is this the right one? Yeah, here it is. Let's go watch him debate Michael Tracey. This is gonna be interesting. Michael Tracey, of course, he's not a big supporter of aid to Ukraine. He was somebody who thought Russia wasn't going to invade Ukraine. He believes that, you know, we're playing too loose with nuclear war, and we need to negotiate and give Russia a lot of their demands. And as we just watched with the Elon Musk statement, when the Russians say negotiate, what they really mean is give us everything we want and we'll negotiate the terms of your surrender. That's what they mean by negotiate. And so until Russia gets more in touch with reality, negotiating is basically just listening to them tell us, give us Kiev, give us Donetsk, give us Luhansk, give us Zaporozhye, give us Kherson, give us Crimea, guarantee water to Crimea, and you will not join any defensive structure that can stop us from invading you 10 years down the road, and it's going to be easier for us because you've already given us half your country. Fuck you. That is Russian negotiation, right? The Russian negotiation tactics is always take the most maximum position possible and scrape out as much as you physically can as the West acts as Neville Chamberlain and pretends they're playing peacemaker by subjugating themselves to an authoritarian invasion of a democratic country, a young democracy that would be under threat by this subjugation. And let me just say, if Zelensky was to agree to this, Zelensky would be in office for less than 72 hours. He'd be run out of town because the vast majority of his popularity is based in the fact, and this is just fact of the matter, is based in the fact that he is defending Ukraine, that he did not flee to the West, that he didn't board the plane offered to him by the United States, that he stood and he fought. That is why Zelensky is so popular in Ukraine. He actually had polling data that was more in the 30s before this war. His polling has skyrocketed because he showed himself to be of a stronger character than Viktor Yanukovych, who fled immediately when the going got tough. And the going got tough because of him, of course, but you get my idea. He's not as much of a coward as Yanukovych. And so if he immediately subjugates his nation to the Russians, all that popularity is gone, his mandate on power is gone, and it'll be run out, and then the country will be overtaken by radicals. If you want to help Azov, and not like all of the soldiers of Azov, but the most radical soldiers in Azov, if you want to help the right sector, if you want to help the National Corps, if you want to help Svoboda, you know, the real far right in this country, when you're talking about right sector and Svoboda, you want to help them? You help them by doing this and making it so that the established kind of more centrist position of somebody like Zelensky, because Zelensky is a centrist when it comes to politics, that didn't work. It's time to get extreme because the moderates gave our country away. That's the message that Svoboda is going to run with, and it's going to be very convincing to a population who was just winning a war a month ago and has now signed away half their country. Anyway, I'm avoiding talking about this. I'm avoiding talking about this right now, but I'm avoiding watching this, so let's watch it, okay? Let's watch this.
Like terrified of kidney stones. It's one of the few things that actually
Burns is an immoral,
morally corrupt, bankrupt man. By the way, everybody, I'm in Miami. Going to these conferences is tremendously expensive. Going to Ukraine and filming is tremendously expensive. We're going to be releasing some footage I took near what could possibly be Ukraine's next Chernobyl at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. We're going to be releasing footage of that in the near future, so go to Dylan Birds TV and subscribe. Go to Dylan Birds Live and subscribe to the second channel as well, and donate to the channel so I can do more journalism like this in the future. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Luigi the Epic Korean. Luigi the Epic Korean. For the Prime Gaming. Interesting name. Didn't know Luigi was Korean. You learn everything. You learn new things every day. I just watched it. Well, we're watching it again. And you guys are such dirty diddle. I was going to call you guys skanks. I probably shouldn't call you guys skanks. But you guys are such dirty little content grubby little munchkins, little maggots that you're going to stay and you're going to watch. Because you just want to hear what I have to say about it. You know, that's how React culture is. And this is just chatting. We're the center of React culture on Twitch. But we are debate skanks. We should stop calling ourselves debate bros and start calling us debate hoes. How about we do that? We're not debate bros here at Dylan Burns TV. We're debate hoes. We bad debate bitches over here at Dylan Burns TV. We're not your debate bro, okay? We're not a debate bro. We're debate hoes. Let's watch.
Good to go? Oh, okay. All right, lads. Just drink lots of water, okay? Howdy. Howdy.
Hey.
There
Can
you
see
are.
hear me?
Yes, I can see and hear you.
Okay, are we live?
We are live right now, yes.
Great. How you
Howdy.
doing?
I'm doing okie dokie. It's actually funny, timing wise.
His camera is so small. I mean, immediately. Michael Tracey's already poisoned me. Immediately, I just thought of Command and Conquer when I saw his thing pop up. Thought he was about to start giving orders.
Because just a little bit ago, I was checking through my email, and you know those pay $5-10 or whatever, and we'll write so and so on Ukrainian ammunition before it gets fired off at the Vatniks.
I think I've vaguely heard of that.
I've interviewed those people, by the way. I haven't released the interview yet, but I will eventually. We just have so much stuff to release. I only released 5% of my footage in Ukraine. We got so much footage in Ukraine that's going to blow your socks off. Stuff where we got to blur out people's faces and like encode their voice so people don't know who they are. That's the type of footage we're working with. I'm so excited to release it all. But I also interviewed those people, the Sign My Rocket people. Good guys, good guys. Met the guy behind it all. Even had lunch with them.
At practice,
I saw my camera. I'll turn it back on in a second.
Can't say I've researched it in depth.
Oh, one of my fans got one of them rockets to say from Vaush and his NATO allies. It's really cute.
Well,
got flowers on it too.
Sounds heartwarming.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh, someone's going to appreciate it. My Twitter's not loading right now.
Just before we begin, I know I said this to you on our message exchange, but just for the benefit of people watching, my genuine intent in having this conversation with you, and pretty much having every conversation that I have on the internet, or even off the internet for that matter, especially on topical subjects, is to stay as close to the substance as possible. No desire to obviously attack you personally. I know obviously everybody, including myself, can be a bit acidic on, say, Twitter at times. But my genuine view is that given the grave importance of this issue, I'm going to strive to keep it totally on the substance, and I'm actually interested sincerely into better understanding your perspective. So we can, of course, disagree or what have you. But one of my sort of reasons for accepting the demands of your followers, and
they are very insistent.
They are, which I congratulate them for. But one of my objectives in having this conversation is that I do actually want to better understand, your view. So anyway.
Yeah, well, maybe we can figure out how to avert nuclear war together, God willing.
Okay, chat, you guys just watched this debate, a lot of you, because you guys came for the Vaush raid. Does that how the conversation goes? Is the conversation goes like, oh yeah, we're understanding everybody's viewpoint. Like, we really, we all kind of like understand each other. I don't really like debate munchkins. Doesn't sound original. I like debate hoes is my favorite. No, hell no, not at all. Not even close. Lol, not at all. No spoilers. No, nope, no. No. My site chat is like, we're barely getting a few no's there, but the Twitch chat, which I don't have on screen, is just scrolling with no, like that, not even like a single yes. Oh my gosh, no answers were obtained. Those are the worst conversations, because you don't even like get to talk about the substance, because like there's no progress. He did not seek to understand the Vaush's views. Oh, that sucks. We'll see though. I'll have to judge it for myself. You guys all Vaush shimps, okay? You're all Vaush hoes. So you guys might be giving me a biased perspective here. Michael Tracey might be the second coming of Jesus. I don't know. And we're gonna find out right now. Who knows?
Yeah,
so
okay. You could convene a peace summit and sing "Kumbaya." Hopefully by the end.
Oh, we can only hope. If there ever would be one, it would be in the Kremlin. So yeah, I guess the main issue, I mean, to just sort of get right to it, is that it seems like right now you post something upwards of 4, maybe 5,000 tweets a day that are all essentially
Not quite that many, but I'll admit that I've been,
Posts a
been a
lot. He posts a lot, man.
involved.
Like I don't even do I follow Michael? I don't even know if I follow Michael, but I see his tweets in my feed a lot, man. And it's mostly like retweets criticizing him. Tracy didn't even know Dugan's daughter was a state operative. You're a Nazi, dude. Am I? Really? Huh. Well, that would probably explain this tattoo, wouldn't it? That would probably explain that, wouldn't it? Ah, damn. You caught me, man. Okay, well, everybody, my official title is Einsatzgruppen für Burns from now on, okay? We're gonna lead the gay Jewish Nazi Reich of NATO into the new age. Oh my goodness, who would have thought? I'm sorry that that I'm not that torn up about somebody who dehumanizes another ethnic group passed away. I'm sorry I'm not that torn up about it. I'm sorry, I'm very upset about it. Nobody say Hail Burns, okay? Chill, okay? I memed a little too close to this on there. Reel it in. Wait, this is your true feelings, Burns? What do you mean? What's this? The Volk and the Okay, that clip does not look good. That clip does not. Okay, let's keep going.
I'm a live streamer. I'm in no position to judge. Say perhaps for their content, because they're just, I mean, they're always like the Russian line, right? The problem I have is it seems like ever since this war began, there's been like 1,000 ways of supporting the Russian line on every conceivable issue, but there's always a bunch of different ways to do it, you know? There are people who are open about it, where it's like, yeah, we support Russia's annexation of Ukraine because we're evil. And I love it when they're that honest. And then there's this like, okay, well, actually, NATO started this, and actually, like, these things were done by Ukraine, and actually, Russia's justifications here are legitimate, and actually, and now we're all the way to this point, right? And the new line right now is, well, we just had the Crimean Bridge get murked, and we have the whole nuclear war business.
No fucking way. Sorry, I just got an update on my phone. Exclusive from CNN. Musk's SpaceX says it can no longer pay for critical Starlink satellite services in Ukraine. Ask Pentagon to pick up the this. Oh, this scumbag. Immediately. Really? Wow, that's very convenient. Out of all the times for this announcement to go, it's right after Russian state media requests for him to start. Okay, look, it might be a coincidence. Okay, good faith burns here. Shakachu. Okay, good faith burns. Who knows? And dude, I give Musk a ton of credit during this war. I paid $500 out of my own pocket to help aid workers deliver Starlink to the front line. I paid for the fucking gas for Starlink to be delivered to the Ukrainian army so they could keep fighting against the occupier, man. So like I was there, man. I mean, I don't want to be like the Vietnam Andy, like, oh, I was there, man. You don't know, but like I was there, man. Like people were praising Musk, man. Like that Starlink has really helped Ukraine, man. Unironically, this might be in a position. SpaceX might put the Pentagon in a position where they're not going to really have a choice but to pick up the tab if they do this. Because it's so vital. But if the Pentagon picks up the tab, if they do it, then Elon Musk can't say things like, oh, you're not allowed to use the Starlink in Crimea, because if the Pentagon is paying for it, which much of it's already been paid by the Pentagon, mind you, that's not what SpaceX would like you to know, but that is true. The Pentagon has paid for a lot of it anyway. If that's the case, then you can't restrict its use in places like Crimea, because that would be unbelievably scummy for people to pay for services of Starlink, but then when Ukraine wins too hard, you try to restrict its use. Because then, if anything, that would almost feel like Elon Musk is the one trying to perpetuate the conflict by trying to not bring it to a swift end through victory. God, man, that's disappointing, man. It's disappointing, man.
And I don't understand the perspectives that are being offered on this nuclear war aversion bid, you know? I mean, the person threatening nuclear war is Putin, constantly, day in and day out, all the time. Hundreds of times a year he's been doing this, even more so now. So it seems like opposition to him is the only sensible way to avoid conflict on this.
Okay, well, first of all, when you say that I've been, parroting the Russian line or that I'm just echoing the Russian line, here's where I think that accusation against me would be valid. If you could demonstrate, or anyone could demonstrate, that on any given, under any given circumstances, I deliberately chose to just seek out the quote Russian line, meaning, the party line as it would be called during the Soviet days, or some official venue for the promulgation of actual Russian propaganda, which of course exists. Especially in wartime, and the propagandistic, tendencies of all states, not least Russia, invariably intensify during wars, and this is a major war. So of course it would be foolish to deny that Russian state propaganda exists. So I think it would be valid if on like some date, pick a date out of thin air, like July 12th, I went to some Russian state outlet and just sort of copy and pasted, or just lifted some talking point that I didn't actually believe, or that I didn't, arrive at through my own independent reasoning, and just put it out there because my purpose is simply to advance.
1 second, mods just banned a Vatnik.
The Russian war aim. And I just have to say, and I'm not, hopefully people could just take my word for this. I'm not sure how I would prove it. But I genuinely have never sought out the quote Russian line on any issue in that sense. I rarely even, frankly, look at what the supposed Russian line is. I don't consume Russian state media virtually at all. The only time I really consume content that comes directly from the Russian government is when, there's a major speech or something, or a press conference from a top official, just like I would for a Ukraine official or an American official.
If I could interject real quick, I don't mean where you get your sources from, because I don't know and I can't prove anything. I just mean that, like, if I recall correctly, you were one of the people saying that the West was warmongering when they were claiming that Russia planned on invading Ukraine, which they did. You were one of the people who said that NATO expansionism up to Ukraine was an instigatory factor, and that Russia was acting out of a perceived self-defense. If I recall correctly, you made that claim.
Can I just interject real quick? Because I would love it. I don't know if you have it in front of you, but I would love if you had terrorism. I would appreciate if you had. I don't know if you do. I mean, and I wouldn't expect you to do like comprehensive research necessarily. But rather than like characterizing what you interpret me to have said about these things, it would be preferable for me anyway if you could cite something or quote something, because I don't want to spend this entire conversation doing the routine where I say, oh yeah, I didn't say that, or you didn't characterize that quite.
Is that what it becomes? Is that the whole conversation? Is that what it's going to be for the next hour and a half before I throw my arms in the air and end stream? Is that what it's going to be? Okay, it is? Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. No, it isn't? I got one person who said no. It's worse? It gets worse. Oh. Oh boy. Okay. Okay. It is pure distilled cancer? Look, I've already taken in enough fumes from burn pits in Ukraine, okay? I already probably got it at this point. So it can't get any worse, can it?
I was just trying to describe what I meant by touting the Russian line. I didn't mean you got, like, you went to conferences and got your sources there. I just mean that the prescriptive positions that you've arrived at have generally been ones that line up with the messaging from the Kremlin. But I don't want to, because, like, it's been like a solid 8 months of war here. To my memory, you've been very consistent to that fact, but it's immaterial either way. We're at the point that we are now. I mean, the most recent things that I recall.
Really quickly on that, and then you can go on. And if it ever so happened that the quote-unquote line I took incidentally accorded with whatever line was being taken by the Russian government, and it's hard to even really define what these lines are, but let's say that did incidentally happen.
Okay, I can give one position that is an example of that. He said that the bombing of the Crimean Bridge was a terror bombing. He called it a deliberate terror bombing of civilians. If Michael Tracey wants a receipt, I mean, here it is. Here is him saying it. It is a deliberate terror bombing of civilians. This you can only believe if you don't understand what terror bombing is, if you don't understand what the Crimean Bridge is, and you don't understand what the goal of disabling the Crimean Bridge is, considering it is one of the most important arteries of the Russian war machine in the south that has supplied the offensive on Kherson, Zaporozhye, and many, many other offensives and the occupation in the south. There is a ton of video publicly available online, much of it I have reposted, of tanks, artillery guns, armored vehicles, just trucks carrying ammunition and grenades and supplies for the military, soldiers using the bridge to transport themselves into occupied territory to fight against the Ukrainians. And many of the shells transported over that bridge were fired at hospitals, were fired at schools, were fired at civilian infrastructure, actual civilian infrastructure, like, an apartment or, a power station or a water supply. So it was the Russian military was using it deliberately for military transport purposes. It was one of the most important arteries for the Russian war machine. It was built up in occupied territory. It was 100% a legitimate military target. This is an example of him parroting a Russian talking point, because this is something that was directly said by Vladimir Putin. You cannot get more from the source than this. This is an example of him parroting a Russian talking point that is just untrue, false, and a lie. It was not a terror bombing. It wasn't a terrorist attack. And his defense of this, which is ridiculous, by the way, I think, what was his defense of it? I remember once again, I have it here somewhere. He defended this by comparing it to 9/11, by saying that a building like the World Trade Center is not civilian either. The World Trade Center was civilian. It was being used for civilian purposes, not military purposes. It didn't have soldiers in it. It was not an American military base. It didn't have tanks in it. It didn't have rockets in it, grenades, rifles, anything like that. The World Trade Center was a civilian target because it was not being used for a military purpose. It was being used to exchange money. It was people's place of work. So yes, the World Trade Center was a civilian target, and Al-Qaeda targeting it was terrorism. The bridge was a military target because it was being used as one of the main arteries for the Russian war machine. I don't understand why it's hard for people to understand this. Bo, the Fifth Column, made a great video on this explaining the basics of it. A bridge used for military purposes is a legitimate military target. It's been this way since the start of war. The Geneva Convention agrees with this. Any reputable military historian agrees with this. Any reputable legal scholar would agree with this. This is completely within the rules of war to target that bridge. It was not a terror bombing.
One point, the alignment of what I'm saying, incidentally, with the Russian government would not make whatever I'm saying ipso facto incorrect simply on the grounds of that alignment. Just as if I happen to say something.
Again, him calling it a terror bombing isn't incorrect because the Russians said it, even though the Russians also said it, and this is a Russian state talking point. It was directly said by Vladimir Putin and people on Russian state media, Sergei Lavrov, Dmitry Peskov, etc. But it's also just wrong and a lie. It wasn't a terror bombing.
That quote aligns with what
I've seen terror bombings in Ukraine. I saw it in the Mykolaiv city center when they targeted apartments and restaurants during rush hour, right? I've seen it, okay? I've had those shells fall within 300 feet of me. I hate to pull this card. That was terror bombing. There was no military target. There was no military use for those buildings. Those buildings were not being used for military purposes. The people who were killed were civilians. The people who died a few hundred feet away from me were civilians. The people who were injured, the 24 people who were injured during those strikes, were civilians. I didn't see soldiers until after the 6th or 7th strike when they ran to go help people. That is an example of a terror bombing. The strategic targeting of a logistical, of a bridge of logistical importance is not terror bombing.
What the American government says, or the Ukraine government says, that doesn't make what I'm saying incorrect just because by happenstance, what I'm saying aligns with what the government is saying.
I'm not saying that you're inherently wrong.
Sorry?
I'm not saying you're inherently... So wait, the goalpost moved a bit there. I'm not saying you're inherently wrong for having positions.
The Crimean bridge bombing is as much of a terror attack as the Russian missile attacks. It depends on what the Russians are targeting. If the Russians target an apartment block, that is terrorism, because there's no military purpose to that apartment block, because the purpose of that bombing, when they use S-300 surface-to-air missiles, which are extremely inaccurate, to bomb the city of Zaporozhye, killing 20 civilians and taking out apartment blocks, that's done to terrorize civilians. The state media is admitting that they need to make Ukrainian civilians feel the suffering. They need them to freeze. They need them to starve. That's why they're attacking their electrical grid. That's why they're targeting their water supply. That is very deliberate and admitted to terrorism. Targeting a bridge used to transport logistics is not. That's a legitimate military target. If you don't accept that, then you don't accept reality. Every single military scholar, anybody who studies war historically, every single person would disagree with you. Any veteran, honestly, any veteran that would say otherwise is a schmuck. The vast majority would also agree with this. Whether you're talking to any military in the world, an electrical grid is a legit military target. What are you targeting the electrical grid for? What is the military? What is the purpose of targeting the electrical grid in Lviv? What's the military purpose? How do they compromise the military in Lviv or in Ukraine by striking the electrical grid? They're not going to capture Lviv. Lviv is way in western Ukraine. There's no scenario where they capture Lviv. The government admitted that they're doing this to make Ukrainians freeze. They admitted it publicly. They're trying to take out the electrical grid because they want Ukrainians to freeze. They have admitted this. That is terror bombing. They're trying to make Ukrainians suffer. That is different than targeting a bridge. If the Russians take out a bridge that Ukrainians are using to transport food to their soldiers, or they're trying to transport guns to their soldiers, that's legitimate military target as well. They shouldn't be doing it because they shouldn't be in the country in the first place, but that's a legitimate military target. That isn't a terror bombing.
Positions that line up with the public statements of the Kremlin. I think that those are correlatively true because the Kremlin lies constantly and is wrong in almost everything that it says, but I don't think that's inherently the case. All these positions can be attacked individually based on their own merits, not just for their association.
Let's put it this way. If, and I agree, of course, belligerent states, which Russia is, that are at war and are, propagating their propaganda pursuant to their desire to cheapen up their war aims, are always going to deceive. But so let's say, I don't know, 99% of what Russia says, and this is just, a thought experiment, 99% of what Russia says as per its quote official line is a lie. And what I say, I don't know, aligns with something like 5% of it. I mean, I'm just throwing numbers out here just for the sake of illustrating this point. So does the fact that I therefore do not align with 94% of the quote unquote Russian lies, I mean, does that redound to my credit at all and kind of demonstrating that I'm not just this mindless parroter of whatever Russia happens to be saying?
So to be clear,
I'm looking at how much this debate goes on for a while. Oh my God. I'm actually going to have to delay my meeting with somebody downstairs to finish this. I'm going to finish it though. Hopefully.
Issue here is not.
And you guys say nothing of value is gained? Like literally nothing? Oh, Jesus. Like they don't move on at all from this? Dylan, let's not do the debate, please. I want to. Michael Tracey doesn't debate people often. So this is a unique opportunity, okay? A unique opportunity. If it gets unwatchable to the point I won't watch it, I'll move on and I'll talk about Tulsi Gabbard. I got a bunch. We'll talk about the battle for Kherson, because the battle for Kherson is going to be heating up in the next week or two. American intelligence and American U.S. officials seem to indicate that Kherson could fall within the next week, as in the city of Kherson, and be recaptured by Ukrainians. So there's a lot to talk about outside of this. But if it gets too unwatchable, I'll stop.
The alignment of your points. It's that.
Okay, good. Well, that's good to establish, actually.
It's that almost everything that you've said on Twitter that I have seen has been wrong. The fact that it lines up with the propaganda. Wait, hold on, because I just want to be clear. I'm happy to talk about any of these things individually, okay? This is a correlative thing.
I saw the news, by the way, everybody keeps spamming me in chat, not blaming you or anything, about Elon being under investigation for his Twitter dealings. Look, okay? Ukraine has powerful actors everywhere, boys, okay? Ukraine, you never know what Ukraine could be behind. Joking, of course, joking.
Putin lies all the time. Of course, warring governments are bound to be, somewhat distrustful, regardless of their general moral disposition. But in this case, like, these are fairly big lies. You know, the most recent stuff that I recall, framing the attack on the Crimean Bridge as terrorism, the nuclear war shenaniganry, and you kind of sort of understanding that the logical conclusion of saying America shouldn't provide arms to Ukraine would have been like, well, maybe we shouldn't have gotten involved in World War II as well. Which,
well, I don't say that exactly, but I know what you're getting at.
No, you said everything but that, right? You said like, well, maybe the Jews could have lived if we hadn't invaded, which is like kind of...
No, that's not what I said at all. We can get into that.
If I remember, somebody would have to provide me the tweet, but it was something along the lines that the Holocaust really picked up once we entered the war, indicating that, like, you know, that we actually had something to do with it, you know, that we perpetuated it or made it worse through our entry into the war, even though it was our entry into the war which was integral to beating Nazi fascism.
As well, if you'd like, but that's not at all what I said.
Wait, out of curiosity, what did you say then? Because you were posting, I mean, it's not just one tweet, like, you engaged in a lot.
Can I just ask you, have you read, I know you've seen tweets of mine, which is fair enough. Have you read any of the many articles that I've written that expound on these points in written form?
Did they make the points much more convincingly than the tweets that were inaccurate?
Well, I mean, just...
Also, good point from chat. It was Germany who declared war on us after Japan, you know, did the whole Pearl Harbor memes. It's weird to call it a meme, but you get what I'm saying.
By nature of Twitter, it's a limited medium. So I'm just curious, have you read any article of mine?
Is occurred.
On that particular
Mover
subject.
And Shaker Hamza Prime number $10. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back in the States. Thank you for the 5 buccarinos.
No.
On any subject?
Oh, I know I've read your articles in the past, but on the specific World War II, American Jewish intervention Holocaust thing. I think I've read a couple of your articles on Ukraine, but that would have been more towards the beginning of the war. No, not in the past couple of months.
Okay, and in terms of the World War II stuff, I'm not just trying to be self-promotional and like advising you to read the article, but it would be helpful and to better understand this point, because I grant that it could be a very heated subject, or it could be an emotionally fraught subject. So I'm not a dummy. I know why people can react strongly to it if they're doing what I regard to be a misconstrual of my point.
Do you think America should have intervened and participated in World War II?
Well, I mean, on World War II, and I'm not dodging the question, because this is exactly what I put in the article, right? And this is my whole point to begin with. So this is not just me deflecting. This is the very reason I was even discussing this topic in the first place. The whole reason why I even got into this World War II sort of tangent was because I'm sure I don't have to tell you that pretty much 24/7 in discussions of Ukraine and Russia and U.S. policy in the war, the analogy of World War II is invoked, as providing.
It's pretty strange when people try to make an argument for U.S. entry into World War II by saying it was necessary to prevent the Holocaust. As we now know, U.S. entry into World War II did not prevent the Holocaust, and may well motivated Hitler to accelerate the Holocaust. So he did say the accelerate point. But when he said, nobody said we entered the war to prevent it. We entered, us entering the war helped stop it, because there were people who were in the camps who weren't dead, and us, by liberating the camps, both us and the Soviets, stopped it. Stopped the Holocaust. They were going to do the Holocaust with us or without us, okay? The Germans were just a little anti-Semitic at the time, okay? Saying, to put it lightly. So I think they would have done it with or without us, no matter what. As they have already, they already put the gears in place to do so.
Some kind of impetus for why it is that the U.S. should engage in interventionist policy.
In fact, if we didn't enter the war would have taken much more time, because it was us opening up a second front, which was integral to, the fall of the Nazi war machine.
Now, vis-a-vis Ukraine, right? So people will say, oh, Neville Chamberlain is the world's most dishonorable appeaser and any.
Well, he did end up being wrong, of course.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just saying this is the kind of analogy that's brought up, or, Hitler annexed the Sudetenland in 1938, and that's somehow comparable to what Putin is or isn't doing. So those analogies are in the ether all the time. So that is what prompted me to get into this, because I wanted to, for instance, overarchingly, what I wanted to do was cast, reasoned empirical doubt on this idea that World War II and U.S. intervention in World War II can just be blithely invoked, whatever the context, 80 years later, as this paradigmatic example of absolute moral goodness. Because the reason why it's invoked in those sort of morally absolute terms is because you're supposed to import sort of the moral contours of World War II to present day as providing this kind of justificatory basis for why it would also be of comparable, moral goodness to engage in interventionist policy.
I think the logic.
I think that's not a well-founded sort of historical analogization.
The logic.
I guess for me, the reason why I bring up World War II is the main reason is because most people know World War II, and if you don't support joining the war on the side of not the Nazis, right, then you're very cringe, and very few people believe that. You're probably actually a Nazi. There's very few people, even the most hardcore libertarians, like I interviewed Larry Sharp, that would not say we shouldn't have entered the war, right? Because of how evil the Nazi regime is. So when somebody says, we shouldn't get involved because I just am against being involved, right? And you ask them this question, then they're in this position where they either need to bite the bullet or not supporting our intervention in the war, which would make them look terrible and show the flaw of their belief system, or they have to accept that under certain conditions, they will interfere with in world affairs. They will get involved in world affairs militarily. They will get involved in world affairs generally. And so for a lot of non-interventionists who are the most dedicated, I don't want to get involved no matter what's going on, you look pretty cringe when you're confronted with this question, because you either answer it honestly and say hey, look, I of course I would have joined the war, and then we've established a basis that you would be in favor of joining wars under certain conditions, and then we just need to find out what those conditions are. Or you say no, I wouldn't have joined, and then you just look like a a monster.
Logic is that it was good for America to intervene in World War II, and that it's also good for us to provide aid to Ukraine. And the only reason you would invoke that comparison.
This is why, by the way, most people will try to avoid answering the question. I found this out on multiple occasions. You can answer the question and then say, this is why I don't like it. Or I don't this is why this is different from that to such a degree that this is the bad word. You can do that, but people don't want to answer the question, because if they establish a foundation for which they would be able to enter the war, or they would be able to enter a war or get involved in some foreign affairs, then you've given them they've let go a weak spot that usually tears apart their argument. Because I can just point at the mass graves in Ukraine. The largest mass grave uncovered in all of Europe since the Yugoslav genocides, uncovered in Izium, 447 bodies. Mass grave uncovered in Lyman. Mass grave uncovered in Bucha. I visited that mass graves. I talked to the locals who told me people were being shot for speaking Ukrainian, on how members of a local churchgoers' church were being tortured in basements. Once you start making these descriptions, and your basis for joining the war is the Nazis were evil, they were bad, they were torturous, they were horrific, then you start, you look bad. And I don't think people want to look bad, because it does look bad not to want to stop all these atrocities. And I feel like people like Michael Tracey don't like biting that bullet.
Here, and indicate that it was not entirely good for us to intervene in World War II. I mean, the parallel here, since you oppose U.S. aid in Ukraine, if I understand you correctly, with that you think we shouldn't have intervened in World War II. So do you think we should have? Because if you think we should have intervened in World War II, then could I not just say, oh, well, then the parallel remains. Even if it was morally complicated, it's still good for us to provide aid to Ukraine.
Well, here's one of the key points that I make on exactly what you're raising. And it's interesting because most people don't seem to be very familiar with this history. And not only is it just interesting unto itself to familiarize yourself with, but it's actually very pertinent now and timely. So when people talk about U.S. intervention in World War II, if you're not like a World War II historian, or you haven't done like a systematic review of the World War II related literature, and you just kind of consume popular conceptions of World War II, probably what you think is that the U.S. went to war after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, right? That's the basic, structure of the rendering that most people have in their heads. And that's just not accurate.
By the way, can I just say, we were involved in the Second World War before the official declaration of war. We were sanctioning Japan, we were sending weapons to the Allies, all things which were moral for the United States to do. And that's why I also am not really happy about, like, sometimes people will be like, oh, well, the rest of the world was fighting the Nazis while America was sitting back and chilling. We weren't. We were sending aid, we were sanctioning, we were doing things to support them, but the American public was not convinced to enter the war. FDR kind of wanted it in to enter the war. He really did. And it was Pearl Harbor that was that in, when the Japanese made a crucial mistake that would spell the end of their empire.
Well, but hold on. The whole point was...
No, wait, Michael. The whole point here, because this is why the initial comparison was drawn.
Hold on what?
Hold on. Let's focus on...
By the way, if you supported sending weapons to Stalin's Soviet Union, which executed hundreds of thousands of people, did mass purges, sent people to gulags, detained people for opposing his government, detained people for their freedom of expression, detained people for being homosexuals, right? Right? Nazi Ukraine doesn't detain people from being homosexuals, but Communist Soviet Union does, okay? And you don't supporting Ukraine against an invasion. Kind of feels a little like you're inconsistent here, almost like you're a partisan hack.
The point, which is whether or not our intervention is good. In World War II, most people, everyone except the Nazis really, say yes. And now, today, most people, except for some groups, say yes with Ukraine. So do you think our intervention in World War II was good or not? I recognize the historical...
It's historically inaccurate that everybody except the Nazis thinks that U.S. intervention in World War II was just universally good.
Time I've asked you.
Prominent socialist in the United States.
It's a yes,
in
no,
the early to mid 20th century disagrees with that.
No question. Please just answer. Do you think the U.S. should have intervened? No, this isn't me being combative. You are very actively avoiding this question.
It's not conducive to a simple yes or no answer. It just simply isn't, because you're leaving out enormously critical context that needs to be elucidated, and even to begin approaching answer the question. This is not me dodging the issue. This is what I expect. 10,000 words. Expounding upon in the article that if people are interested in watching out, they can go look up.
The context that you looked through, what was the conclusion you arrived at for the validity of our intervention?
Here was the conclusion that I arrived at. And I spelled it out in as clear as English as I could. What I'm rejecting is not that U.S. intervention into World War II was good, because that's like a counterfactual, almost sort of what seems to be sort of like a lazy, knee-jerk type argument. I'm not making that argument. I'm making arguments that relate specifically to the present day and the moral valence that is ascribed to these World War II analogies that get imported into present day debates. And one reason why I'm rejecting that this notion of World War II as this paradigmatic example of absolute goodness as relates to U.S. military intervention, there are a couple of reasons. A huge one, and I'm sort of curious what you think about this, and we can sort of connect it to what's going on now. A huge one is there was a genuine, indisputable, even people who were ardently pro-Roosevelt, even people who were ardently pro-intervention, meaning they were agitating for the U.S. to intervene militarily in World War II contemporaneously and afterwards. There's basically universal acceptance that there was a massive campaign of state deception undertaken by the Roosevelt administration, by the military brass, even to some extent by the Congress, to conceal from the public the true nature of U.S. military intervention well before Pearl Harbor. So well before the point at which most people just kind of popularly assume the U.S. entered the war, right? So the U.S.
We should have entered the war. The FDR's administration wanted to, but couldn't because there wasn't enough support because, depression hours. You know, it's kind of, it can sometimes be hard to show people exactly how brutal and worse conditions are overseas when there's sometimes difficult conditions at home. This is a question that's even being proposed today, but we answered this question 80 years ago, that sometimes the evil is so intense that we must commit ourselves to the struggle for freedom, the struggle for democracy, the struggle against fascism, the struggle against Nazism, stuff like that. The government wanted us to enter the war, but we couldn't because we didn't have popular consent yet. And then Pearl Harbor gave us that popular consent.
U.S. enacted this.
Just into this war, I think Americans largely have learned their lesson from World War II to some extent, and that's why they're supporting Ukraine, even despite some of the difficult conditions at home for economics right now. 66% of Americans want to continue and somewhat even expand the amount of military supplies we're giving to Ukraine. And those numbers only continue to go up as Ukraine's military victories on the battlefield continue to increase. That number is up from 53% just like 3 months earlier.
Massive arms provision program, Lend-Lease, that's, by the way, been revived as of this past April.
Which I agree with, which I'm fine with.
Yeah. And Lend-Lease was sold to a war-wary public, because remember, World War I was largely considered on a bipartisan basis to have been a disaster. I'm getting to the point.
We're talking. What is the point going to be a yes/no answer to the question?
The point is that given that massive campaign of state deception that was fundamental to the means by which the U.S. entered the war, I'm saying that fact means that a binary yes or no answer, that fact explains or helps explain why I'm not willing to say just a flat yes to your question to me, because that would necessitate saying that yes, it's just absolutely morally good for the government to undertake an extensive, protracted campaign of
Michael,
deception to bring a country to war. And I don't tend to endorse that.
No, it isn't. You can say, I think it's good that we intervened, but I disagree with some things we did. You can say, overall, I think our intervention...
That's every war. Wars are brutal, bloody, like disgusting endeavors, man. Disgusting endeavors. And there's no army in history that has been 100% moral. But that does not mean that there are not fights that are worth fighting, and not moral calculus where you say this side is obviously worse than the other. That's why you just look at like the amount of Russian war crimes compared to Ukrainian war crimes, and it's not even comparable. The Soviet Union committed oh my gosh, my chair went down. Look at me, I'm now manlit. I look like infrared. There are so many men who committed terrible war crimes in the name of the Soviet Union, but the amount of war crimes Nazi Germany committed was so much more that providing arms to Soviet Union was a moral imperative. Same thing with the French army, same thing with the British army. I mean, what Churchill did to India is horrific. But again, Nazism was such a threat to security in the world, to human livelihood, to basic freedom, that it needed that unity. We needed that unity in order to beat it, because it was a priority.
In World War II was a good thing, but I don't agree with all the behaviors our government engaged in. That is not only is that a reasonable position to take, it's mine, but also it's like the way a normal person would think about it. Nobody would think, because I agree with the U.S. intervening in World War II, I'm therefore endorsing every single thing the government did over that time
just
period.
Curiosity, though. I mean, just stipulating that I'm basically right in explaining this deception campaign, and you don't have to take my word for it.
Nobody here is talking about a deception campaign. We're talking about whether the intervention was justified.
How do you view that in moral terms?
I'm talking about the intervention as a whole.
But the state deception.
No.
How do you view that?
Wait, Michael.
I guess he would need to say what part of state deception, like just the fact that FDR wanted to join the war, or like what specifically did they do? Like he needs to give like a specific, because like we lied a lot as America. Some lies were necessary, some others were not. Like what? Like if the government, if somebody asks, "Do you have spies in this location?" we say no. Like what do you expect to say? Okay, you caught me. His name is Jacob. He's a Sagittarius, and he's in room 235 at the Hyatt Hotel. Like, well, no. Like what lies are necessary and what not? Like we would need specifics, right? I would assume. Does he give specifics? I assume he will.
We're talking about the moral value of intervening to fight the Nazis.
The value of state deception to bring a country into war.
Wait, bring a country into war?
Intervention in World War II.
Whoa, I'm sorry. Do you think the U.S. started the war?
No. Here's what I'm saying.
But you're doing it right now. So this right here. Wait, Michael. This is why. Because I called you a weasel the last time we talked, and nothing has really changed. You deny. Wait. You deny the parallel between the World War II intervention and today. But what you're trying to do is imply that parallel. What you're doing right now is going like, well, how can we really say intervention is good or not when there's all this deception behind the line?
Hold on a second. I'm not denying that any parallel could reasonably be drawn. There actually are some potentially plausible.
Do you want the answer? I can spoil it if you want. I assume it won't take him too long to say it.
Parallels. The parallel or the analogy that I am rejecting is the importation of the moral valence of U.S. intervention to World War II as though it's just this paradigmatic example of absolute goodness into present day. That's what
nobody is talking about.
So, Michael,
you're doing it again. Nobody is talking about intervention in World War II as a paradigmatic virtue of moral goodness. We're just talking about whether it was. I am talking about whether it was good generally or bad generally. That if you could flip the on-off switch on U.S. military intervention in World War II, would the world be better if we hadn't done it? Not was everything we did during it good.
The problem is if Michael answers, right, then Vaush it's got all he needs to make his argument, right? And so I feel like that's why Michael Tracey is avoiding it, unless Michael Tracey genuinely thinks we shouldn't have entered the war, which would be a wild position, a absolutely wild position to say that America shouldn't have entered the war. I don't know, we just bombed Pearl Harbor and FDR comes out and says, okay, we're gonna give California and Hawaii to the Japanese. Hope that's enough to satisfy. I just want to hear just say yes, man. Just say yes.
As the point that I was trying to get you to address respectfully, which is that, I mean, how do you feel? Let's say that you believe.
I don't know enough about the specifics.
How do you view the state deception that was integral in bringing U.S. intervention into World War II about?
I don't know the specifics of what you're referring to, and I don't have a reason to trust your characterization of it.
Okay, I mean, it's all totally mainstream literature.
That's fine. I mean, I'm glad we went and fought the Nazis. Even if the government lied, I'm glad we went and fought the Nazis. Even if the government lied. Oh, then the government, if the government lied.
That's where you and I differ. Because if the government lies, or I don't even use the word lie because it's sort of excessively.
So wait, the government lies, so you should let the Nazis win?
Okay, so there's a few scenarios where I'd be fine with it. For example, let's say there's some shortage of something, right, during our war with the Nazis. And if we don't win the war by 1946, we're going to have shortages of bread or something. I would be fine with the government, even if I think it would be bad strategy. If the government had good reason to believe that keeping that information from the public or possibly even lying about it would mean that we could get to winning the war, beating the Nazis, and then we would avert the crisis to begin with, then I'd be like, okay, I'd be fine with that lie. But there's he's got to give me examples, because the majority of situations, I don't want the government to lie to us. There's very few situations where it'd actually be okay with the government lying. I would need to hear what the situations are. What is the situation?
If the government undertakes a sprawling campaign of deception to bring a country or bring the United States into a war, but entry into which, by the way, was largely opposed.
But they declared war on us.
And I'm not willing to just give a yes or no, binary, morally absolute endorsement to that practice.
So it's hard. Yeah, I already brought this up earlier. How did they lie us into the war if we were the ones that were bombed?
Nobody's doing that, and nobody's talking about this.
But also,
they declared war on us.
Do effectively do that because
Michael, you're talking to me. Okay. Right. So if you're not willing to directly answer whether stopping the Nazis was a good or a bad thing, we can move on to other talking points. But this, some of the assumptions you're making here are delusional. Supporting the intervention means that you're
substantiated by the factual historical record.
Michael, nobody here is claiming that if an intervention was good, that necessarily means that everything the government did leading up to it was good. Nobody's even thinking
state
that.
secession in particular. So that, let's say it did happen in World War II. Let's just stipulate that.
You realize they declared war on us, right?
Sorry?
They declared war on us. You realize that, right?
Who did?
Japan and Germany?
Yeah, the whole point of what I'm getting at here is that U.S. intervention into World War II, and maybe you should familiarize yourself with the record. It's pretty illuminating. It was well underway before that.
Yes, and it was good. It was good. I talked about this before. That's why I think people don't try to give America credit. We were supplying people with guns and bombs and trucks and food. You know, Soviet soldiers were eating American peaches out of cans well before we started fighting in Iwo Jima and we dropped any bomb on Nagasaki. And we don't get any credit for that, really, because it's just most people don't know about it. But like, yeah, it's like, that's good. That's a good thing, though. I mean, I'm in favor of that. That's a good thing. If anything, we should have increased that support.
Months and months and months, at least before those formal declarations of war. Because as you might be aware, the U.S. doesn't enter warfare strictly by virtue of...
I think at one point, literally 5 to 10% of Russia's trucks were American. I forget the exact amount.
A declaration of war, like there was no declaration of war in Vietnam or Korea or Iraq, etc. Right? So a similar thing happened prior to Japan and Germany.
We did a Vietnam.
War in the United States in 1941. And if you're not familiar with that record, I'm happy to share the materials with
Michael,
you. You'll probably find it interesting.
Just say, what did we do? Like, we sold weapons? We're allowed to do that. That's not war.
I'll tell you a couple. I mean, I'll tell you a couple things we did. And here's a thing that we did that led none of this is fringe. This is what's so amazing about it. And what's so amazing why it's so.
By the way, he's about to say sanction the Japanese, I assume. That was good. We should not have allowed American oil to grease the wheels of the Japanese war machine. The American sanctions, the American embargo, we should have not allowed American oil, American gas, American supplies to assist Japan in colonizing all of Asia. That was a bad thing, and it was good that we did not allow our economy to be used by the Japanese to do so that we could have American oil shipping Japanese troops to Nanking to rape, murder, and slaughter the locals and put babies on the ends of bayonets, which happened, by the way. Shortcake McGee, thank you so much for the tier 1. Appreciate it. $5 to 10%, and that's what America is most famous for, sending to the Soviets, lol. We beat the Nazis, you fuckers. If you really think America didn't do shit during World War II, then you're just historically illiterate. People try to like say, the Soviets did it, America didn't do shit, but literally Stalin, this was like him from like 1941 to 1944. For the love of God, please, a second front. I need a second front, my God, please, second front me, please, second front. I need a second front. Please, Dresden's right there. Please bomb Dresden. I'm telling you, please, bomb Dresden. I'm telling you, bomb Dresden. Please give us more aid. We need more supplies. Then like 1946 rolls around. Puh, those terrible Americans bombed Dresden. We're going to really make sure the East Germans know how horrific the Americans were in bombing Dresden. Unironic, by the way, they taught in East Germany that the bombing of Dresden was a terrible atrocity committed by the Western imperialists, even though it was the Soviet Union and Stalin who requested the bombing of Dresden. It's also something pushed by Nazis. It's like hardcore like East German communists and Nazis both like complain about the bombing of Dresden quite frequently.
Omitted from the popular consciousness. The military affairs editor of the New York Times, okay, and
so let me be clear, I'm not downplaying that the Soviet Union did a lot to fight the Nazis. I'm just saying people like to pretend like it was the Soviet Union and like everybody else was like second fiddle, right? Like what aid did the Soviets didn't send us guns. The Soviets didn't send us trucks. The Soviets didn't send us food. We sent them everything. We sent them shit. They didn't send us anything to fight and open up the second front. We just opened up the second front for them, which was integral to taking German troops away from the Eastern Front to shorten the length of the war. It was integral. They weren't the ones who liberated Italy. They weren't the ones who liberated France. They weren't the ones who liberated the Netherlands. They weren't the ones who liberated Belgium. They weren't the ones that liberated all that territory. We did it. It was a dual effort by both the United States and the Soviet Union, by Ukrainians, by Russians, by Tuvans, by Chechens, by all number of people. You helped, but it wasn't much. Stalin would disagree with you up till 1946 when it was politically convenient to deny it.
September 1941, so well before Pearl Harbor. He said that the United States entered the European War in July.
Not to mention, what about the Japanese? Who fought the Japanese? The Soviet Union declared war on the Japanese at the last second when it was most convenient. They stayed out of the fight with the Japanese until the last second. It was us who did the island hopping and the bombing campaign that helped lead to the surrender of Japan. It was the Soviet entry and the American dropping of 2 atomic bombs that eventually led Japan to surrender. But we did all the fighting in the Pacific for those 4 years. The Soviets had border skirmishes, but it could be nothing compared to the Japanese and American fighting that happened on locations like Iwo Jima.
July of 1941. So
what
about
did we
6
do?
months before Pearl Harbor. I'll tell you right now. Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah, it was the thing about World War II, and it's a beautiful thing, but people want to erase this because they want to be they want to be partisan hacks, to be quite frankly. It was most of the world uniting against Nazism and fascism, which is a beautiful thing. America, the Soviet Union, the UK, the French resistance, the Yugoslav partisans, the Chinese, like all these people from all around the world uniting to fight fascism and fight this expansionism. It was beautiful. And like people just want to be like, but we did, fuck you though, you didn't do shit. Like, dude, everybody contributed to the full extent that they could, basically. And everybody played an integral role. There's a reason why Stalin wanted a second front so badly, and there's a reason why we sent those supplies to the Soviet Union, but it was the Soviet Union doing the dying in most part on the Eastern Front, and we gave them the supplies to continue to do the dying that would eventually lead to the collapse of the Nazi Reich.
Roosevelt secretly ordered the U.S. military.
Some did, and also I don't want to get too dirty here. I can get pretty dirty. I can get really dirty. The Soviets invaded Poland with the Nazi Reich. They could have just told Hitler no. They could have just said, no, we're not going to do that. Or when Hitler invaded France, they could have been like, okay, time to open up a second front and crush the Nazi Reich. We're going to rip off this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Didn't do it then either. Didn't do it when Paris was about to be marched upon. Didn't do it when the Nazis crossed the Ardennes. Didn't do it when Belgium fell. Didn't do it when the Netherlands fell. Didn't do it during the invasion of Norway. Just saying. Just saying. In fact, the Soviet Union was actually trading with the Nazis during that period. Trading with them. Helping to grease the wheels of the Nazi war machine. Not that American companies didn't also continue to trade with the Nazi war machine. This is a fault of when it came to trade of both American greed and I would say Soviet short-sightedness would maybe be the lightest way I could put it.
Occupation of Iceland and sending a expeditionary convoy into a German war zone. That military occupation, and I'm not even being a pejorative, using a pejorative to call it a military occupation. That's what the U.S. Navy classifies it as.
I can debate you on this if you want. I mean, we can debate if the sky is blue. I don't know. I mean, do you deny that they invaded Poland? And you can say that, like, oh, but they saved the Jews of Poland. They didn't really save the Polish from anything. The Soviets terrorized the Polish. I'm gonna be for real with you. They did like they proceeded with Russification. I mean, it's like the same policies of the Russian Empire. They went in there, they started deporting people en masse, taking them on trains, shipping them to Siberia. They did what the Soviets do, which is terror, instituting terror in populations that they see as rebellious in nature. Stalin did the same thing to the Tartars, man. It happened. They stood back and watched as the Warsaw Uprising was crushed. because those were the rebellious little troublemakers that they would have to deal with later. And then they installed their own guys. I mean, I interviewed people who participated in the Solidarity movement in Poland, man. Like, the Polish don't remember the Soviet Union that fondly. There's a reason why Poland is emptying out its tank reserves and sending it to Ukraine, man. Okay, want a debate? Not really. No. Polish nationalists. Wow. The amount I don't care. It could not be contained. You know, if there's any group of people on the planet that have a good reason to feel some pride in the amount of suffering they went through, it's the Poles. Okay? Just gonna be honest. This is historical revisionism. You can call it whatever you want, okay? Repeating history back to you. You can call it whatever you want.
It's records. Pursuant to that occupation and pursuant to Lend-Lease, which had already been enacted in March, Roosevelt
how is that war?
Initiated naval warfare against Germany, thus bringing the U.S. into active combat with Germany for the first time. And again, this was well before the formal declarations of war that came in December.
First of all, how is that
awesome? By the way, that's a good thing we did.
First one war? We have the right to move our troops over?
Well, I mean, the United States had never, in its entire history, sent U.S. military forces.
How is that? How is that joining the war? We wanted to protect shipping lanes.
Okay, so if a U.S. Navy vessel initiates an attack on...
Dude, can I just say, there's a reason why a lot of like the hardcore Marxist-Leninist types are despised by like Polish people, Estonian people, Latvian people, Lithuanian people, Ukrainian people, Moldovan people, Romanian people, okay? All of which countries which had brutal occupations, okay? There's a reason why you can call them all nationalists, you can call them all evil little bad guys who should have been gracious to the Soviet Union when they jailed political dissidents, when they had their family members taken from their homes and shot, man. The Tartars should really like being killed, you know? I mean, they should have been grateful. When you think about it, you know, they should have been grateful for that. Like, there's just so much impotence that comes from it, right? From people who have never been to Poland, from people who have never been to Ukraine, people who have never been to these countries, never talked to locals, hear what their experiences, the family tragedies that took place, man. Like, just this, the Soviet Union was under Stalin especially, was just an atrocious, horrible place to live, unless of course you were part of the Muscovite elite.
An enemy navy.
So Iceland cooperated with us.
No, they didn't. Actually, they didn't. The
You gotta learn how to pronounce Tatars right. Look, I can't pronounce anything correct. Okay, I can't say nuclear. Okay, I can't say words in English, and you want me to say words in other languages. Okay, you're asking too much of me.
British had initially occupied Iceland.
Yes,
and the U.S. took over for the British, and it was done under protest. And then once the U.S. got in, it's true that Iceland, you know, sort of reconciled.
States are complicated things. Some of them do amazing things. Some of them do terrible things. Soviet Union is no different. True. I mean, some states are worse than others. I mean, like the last gift the Soviet Union gave to Ukraine was Chernobyl, which they tried to cover up, by the way. They tried to cover up hardcore. They bullied the scientists who tried to go public about the RKBM reactors, which caused this disaster. I mean, like, look, okay. I watched the HBO Western propaganda series recently. Really good, by the way. I recommend it highly.
Itself to the occupation, but it was not endorsed by Iceland ever.
Moving some troops over to Iceland with the cooperation of Iceland. Michael, we're as is your goal, mind you, we are 50 points away from the main point, and as as I expected, like, this is a nothing burger. Moving troops to a neutral island is not beginning the war, and even if this was the case, this has nothing to do with intervention to stop the Nazis.
The New York Times
Michael, I am unwilling. Wait, Michael. You already.
What do I think of Michael Tracey generally? I disagree with him on basically almost all foreign policy. I would say, like, I agree. The thing is, I feel like Michael Tracey is just like, I almost feel a lot of times it feels almost like contrarianism, but it feels like he's like against basically any intervention generally. So like, I'm gonna agree with him on Iraq. I'm gonna agree with him on Yemen, but then I'm just gonna disagree with him on Taiwan. I'm gonna disagree with him on Ukraine, because the places where I'm like, okay, we should stand up for the moral struggle, he's gonna be like, not our business, or it's the West's fault, or like whatever. So it's just gonna be hit or miss depending on the issue,
If you can't answer basic yes/no questions, and everything is going to be this infinite fractal tree where you try to convince me that intervention was implicitly bad by misrepresenting history,
I don't have to choose between yes or no.
why don't we talk about the modern day? If we are incapable of engaging in sort of associated discourse, then let's talk directly. Do you think Russia should have invaded Ukraine?
No, you brought up something. I have to just quickly finish the point. You may not be aware of the historical record, which
I'm
is
aware
fine.
of everything.
People are not. Okay, are you aware then that on the orders of Franklin Roosevelt, starting in September of 1941 into October, 3 incidents of naval warfare were initiated?
Michael. Oh God. Michael.
This is mean. This is you're doing him dirty. You're doing Vaush dirty.
By the United States against Germany in the waters around Iceland, where Roosevelt had sent secretly a military occupation force, thus initiating active warfare.
You mean
you're indirectly promoting Nazi propaganda with these talking points? Like, I literally, like, I've heard, dude, you can't, when somebody says the Soviet Union did something bad, you can't just call it Nazi propaganda, okay? What happened under Stalin was evil, okay? Chernobyl was a bad mess up, okay? It was an oopsie, okay? It was an oopsie. The RKBM reactor, oopsies. Kind of a big oopsie, That's pretty bad. That isn't Nazi propaganda. That happened. The jailing of political dissidents, not Nazi propaganda. That happened. The deporting of the ethnic population residing in Crimea, not Nazi propaganda. That happened. Okay. The execution of political dissidents, the purges, not Nazi propaganda. That happened, right? The Soviet economic mismanagement, not Nazi propaganda. That happened, right? The suppression of political dissidents in Poland, not Nazi propaganda. That happened. Crushing Polish independence movements, not Nazi propaganda. That happened, right? The deportation of Poles to Siberia, not Nazi propaganda. That happened, right? These are all things that happened. It's not Nazi propaganda. Again, not denying that, then like, what are you doing? Oh, whatever. Okay, let's just continue with this.
In the waters, you mean in the waters of Iceland, where German vessels were trespassing?
Well, whether they were of course they were trespassing. It was an active war zone. That's the whole point.
Okay, so no, it's not us initiating when they go over to a neutral country. And Michael, I'm not interested in this World War II revisionism.
It's an attack against ship 2.
Look, they outlawed homosexuality, man. They outlawed homosexuality under Stalin, man. The homosexuality was not decriminalized until the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? Again, not Nazi propaganda, not that it would be, because the Nazis hated gays anyway. That happened. That was a policy implemented by Stalin and kept in place by Khrushchev, kept in place by Brezhnev, kept in place by everyone. The first state to decriminalize homosexuality was actually Ukraine during the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's just like, whatever. It's like, I'm trying to explain how you can compare Stalin's crimes, mostly on class enemies and nationalist enemies, to crimes committed by nationalists. The thing is, just because you oppose the Soviet Union does not make you a nationalist or a class enemy. And if you are a nationalist in the idea of like, I believe that Ukraine should be separate from the Soviet Union, you're actually right. That's different from being Stefan Bandera if you believe that Soviet authoritarianism is not for you. Same thing with the Poles, same thing with the Lithuanians, the Estonians, and the Latvians. The people who fled these places to go to the West and talk to media about how they want their homeland to be free. You can't just say, oh, these are all like fascist types. They're not. They're not. Of course, there are some, but they're not all fascists. They hate that type of Soviet authoritarianism. Like the Nazis were worse than the Soviets. But the Soviets were also very bad. And once the Nazis were gone, they should have left Poland, or at least give the Polish a fair election or chance to decide if they stay, which they didn't. And Stalin would have never permitted it. Same thing when it came to Ukraine. Same thing when it comes to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Same thing when it came to all these territories. I'd argue they were way better than America, then we're just on two completely different planets.
If Ship 1 is part of a navy that goes halfway around the world and then initiates an attack on Ship 2, that's an initiation.
They didn't go halfway around the world. It was Iceland that cooperated with us.
Better than Jim Crow America? Like, what do you mean, like, better than Jim Crow America? If your question is, if I was to take the Soviet Union under Stalin and compare that to America during the 1950s, I would say that Stalin's Soviet Union was absolutely worse. Yes, I would make that statement. America has a lot of flaws, racism being its biggest sin. But if you're just asking me to look at all the crimes committed by America during the 1950s and all the crimes committed by the Soviet Union to its own population in the 1950s, domestic policy, and we were talking about who it ruled over, absolutely. Absolutely, no questions asked. It's the easiest moral decision in the world. Now, if we're talking about foreign policy, the calculus is going to be a little different. But domestically, yes. Like when we talk about the assassination of Fred Hampton, right? We're talking about the spying on Martin Luther King. If there was some like Martin Luther King for like, I don't know, like Ukrainians, like we want to do our own thing. And, you know, maybe we shouldn't have our language treated like it's a backwater, like it's for country folk. Why are we having all of our papers have to be in Russian? Why can't they be in Ukraine? If that happened during the Soviet Union, that dude would have just been assassinated. Just pow. Again, like, Black people were not considered human at the time. Black people were not treated like humans. That is absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. Do you think the people in the gulags were treated like humans? Do you think they were? What about the homosexuals that were in the gulags? Were they treated like humans? There was no policy of you're black, so you go to gulag in America. Terrible shit in the United States, right? Terrible shit we did to black people in the United States. But if we're really just gonna like stand here and say who was worse, like I've already said who I think was worse. The biggest crime America ever did was racism. Political enemies versus being black. But the thing is, being a political enemy is anybody who asserts the Ukrainianness, right? That is being a political enemy. Right? Being a political enemy is anybody who's too, you know, you're being a little too Polish. You're being a little too Polish. You gotta go to Siberia, my guy.
Iceland was a neutral country. We had troops stationed there.
How far is it from New York to Iceland?
Michael, we had permission to be there. They entered Iceland's waters.
No, that's wrong.
It seems like a skill issue. They should have
there was
not
no
done
permission
that.
to be, be there. I mean,
I don't understand what the purpose of this revisionism is outside of Nazi apologia.
Here, these are basic facts.
Let's move to the current day. We're racing ahead.
That people toss around when they can't reckon with the actual record.
We're racing ahead 80 years. We're racing ahead 80 years, okay? So Russia invades Ukraine. I think it's bad that they did that.
The very first thing, look it up. Look up the tweet yourself. February 24th, or maybe it was February 25th. Early in the morning. The absolute very first thing I said when the invasion was launched by Russia on February 24th was, and this was sincere. This wasn't me just like covering my bases or something, because I actually am, on principle, or up. There's never been an instance that has caused
Michael,
me to
what did the
question
tweet
whether this
say?
principle is accurate the launching of aggressive war. And so the very first thing I said when the war was launched was, and I don't usually do like a moralizing tone, but I made an exception here, and I did it in moral terms.
Okay, so I'm glad we agree.
I opposed it. I've never supported the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The very first comment I made about it once it was launched was a moral condemnation.
I'm glad we agree on that. So because we oppose the invasion of Ukraine, we're both happy that Ukraine is able to defend.
Dylan, I'm one of your OG haters. The mods timed you out for a half hour. I mean, okay. What do you want me to do about it? Like, I don't even know. I don't know what you did. What did you do? Driving the nail in the coffin of Ukraine's war support. Keep picking out the comments that look best for you. But dude, there's a million people talking at the same time. I can't always just like respond to your comments, okay? Like, yeah, I don't think anything that should have gotten you timed out. But we're running low on mods, so this will be my purge, okay? Okay? And hey, I was just told that purging isn't that bad comparatively. So, we gotta... It's not that bad. Remember, you got purged. You got purged. Okay, you got purged for your political beliefs. How bad is that really, okay?
Defend itself, right?
Well, there's the leap that doesn't follow from being morally condemnatory of an aggressive invasion and then saying, oh, yeah, by the way, the U.S. ought to send about, at this point, $70 billion worth of what they call aid to Ukraine, which is, basically just subsidizing their entire military and sending
Dylan, you think it's the same as being purged because you're black or Jewish? Okay, we didn't purge people for being black. I don't know what you mean by that. Like during the period of the Soviet Union, we didn't like, what do you mean? We didn't, like, black people weren't allowed to go into higher society. They were segregated, Jim Crow. But what do you mean by we purged black people? What do you mean purging black people? What was the purge against black people? Like, we did a lot of terrible things to black people, but I don't remember anything from like my history book that was like the purge. Lynching was legal? What do you mean lynching was legal? There was lynching that was like the cops looked the other way on, but was there, like, what do you mean the lynching was legal? There was a lot of periods where like chaos would chaos would ensue and like race riots would go on and people would never be prosecuted and stuff like that. What do you mean it was legal? Like, I guess if you look the other way, then in effect it's legal. But there wasn't like what do you mean by like so would you say that like the systematic government sponsored purge of the ethnic communities in, say, Crimea was the same as the lynching? Like, there's I don't want to get into specifics of this because all of this stuff we're talking about is the most evil stuff humanity has ever done, right? Jim Crow and slavery and the Native American genocides are three of America's largest sins that we ever committed. Then you can get into things like Vietnam as well, stuff like that. But those three are particularly evil. And so when we're comparing these things, I don't think there was anything. I'm trying to think, like, when we talk about Crimea and what happened to the population there, was there like any period like where we were just during the same time of the Soviet Union's existence, or when Stalin was doing it, like that we were like, all the black people have to go to like Nevada, like get on the train, you're all going to Nevada now, a lot of you will starve and die on the way. We did that with Native Americans, but that was before the Soviet Union was a thing, right? Had camps for the Japanese. That was particularly bad. True. That would be true. But that also isn't black people. That's a different group. But yes, that was probably one of the worst things we did during Stalin's reign, was probably the internment camps for the Japanese.
For greater caliber of weaponry.
But also, can we... Oh, fuck, I would hate to say this. But dude, if we're really... This is a terrible debate. If you would have put a gulag next to a Japanese internment camp... Oh God, there's no way for me to win here because we're like saying which tragedy is worse, 9/11 or this bombing in Kabul. Let's compare. Like, what was the survivability rate in the Japanese internment camp compared to a gulag? A Siberian gulag versus a Japanese internment camp. What was the survivability rate, and what was like the amount of food like the interned got? Like, again, you're looking at this as discrete cases. We have to look at the system. There was a system of gulag. The gulags were a system. It wasn't like a one-off or a two-off, right? It wasn't like a single hate crime or something. They both sucked. They were both the worst. We're comparing the worst sins of both countries.
You can make it sound scary if you want. We're fully in favor of this.
It's in every sense good for the U.S. to operationally coordinate the entire.
The gulags were for political enemies, though. It's different. Why was it that they made up certain groups of people a lot more than other groups of people? Like, isn't that a little suspicious that there was certain disproportionate amounts of groups that were represented in the gulags? And a lot of people were forcefully relocated. The death rate in Japanese internment camps were comparable to the general public? Were they really? The known that the Spanish internment camps in Cuba... Approximately a dozen deaths as a result of shooting during various escape attempts, as well as several children and elderly people dying as a result of inadequate health care. So 12. And several children. When you say several, what is the amount of several? You had a 2 times risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay. Overall, it's worth stressing out that people were randomly dying of were not randomly dying of minor ailments, maltreatment, or overwork or starvation. The crude rate of mortality within the camps was approximately 1.5%, and essentially the same as non-intern civilians for the period. Okay. God, there is no way to win here. It's like, this is like epic rap battles of history. Holocaust versus Armenian genocide. Begin. This is the worst possible optics thing I could discuss. This is what we're doing right now. Let's stop. I'm done. I'm done for this discussion. Hey, look, he's pogging, kind of.
War effort, that's somehow just good, and we should have no further thoughts about that except in this binary sense of just saying, oh yeah, good, and then just repeating it over and over. Like,
you can think about it if you want. Symbols. Michael, you're like sewing over something everyone here agrees. Thank you for agreeing with us. Yes, the United States is the most powerful country to have ever existed. Well, yeah, and with our help, Ukraine will stand.
The monkey version of just saying good to a complex set of policy issues.
Well,
then
wait, you're the one who facetiously started doing a silly voice and making fun of my positions.
I shouldn't have done that. I apologize. I get worked up.
So yes, I think it's good.
The issue.
Okay, so let's try. Maybe we can work from basic complexity. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
So if Russia invaded, and it's bad that they invaded, it must necessarily stand that it would be good if they wouldn't have invaded, right? Because if the invading is bad, then not invading must be the preferable, right? So if that's what you want, the outcome.
I wonder if there's any period during the Soviet Union that I could pick out of that I would say that's better than America. I would have to go back and look. Not Brezhnev and not Stalin. Not Khrushchev. Gorbachev, but he was particularly brutal too. Not particularly brutal, like compared to the rest, but he was still bad. Maybe Lenin? No. Malikhanov? Isn't this the dude who was like for like 2 years after Stalin or something? But didn't he keep most of Stalin's policies and was only when Khrushchev got in the power? Like this guy, he was like in for like no? Or am I wrong? Yeah, he briefly succeeded Joseph Stalin for like a year or two. Yeah, for literally 2 years. But did he really roll back much of Stalin's policies? And did he roll back enough that it would have been better than living in America's 1950s? Trotsky, but he never let it. I guess Lenin is like the closest I could think of, maybe. Yeah, this guy was like for 2 years. I would argue that American ethnic segregation was far more evil. Among other things, it substantially increased the mortality rate of black Americans. Yeah, segregation obviously would be much more evil to look at as like what it did to the mortality rate of a people than the Japanese internment camps. But the Japanese internment camps was just such obvious targeting of a certain group of people. There isn't like getting around it. It isn't like indirect or it was like very direct. He just denied the Holodomor. Ooh, that's pretty cringe. Pretty cringe. Lenin, Stalin, Melikhanov, Khrushchev. I don't know who this guy is. Who is Andropov? Did this guy do anything of note? Who's this guy? He served from 1982 until 1948. I don't know. I guess did he continue? Well, did he continue the Soviet war in Afghanistan? Like, is he like important at all? Did he do anything of note? What about this guy? 1840. Dude, they were like dropping like flies. Holy shit! Brezhnev, then that guy, then this guy. They were dropping like flies over there. Who knows? Where were we?
Of not invading is one in which Russia.
I would say like I can find, it's not that they're communist even, right? Like I could probably say that like if you lived in like the Republican Spain for a brief period of time, it was probably better when it came to like diversity and how they treated people than the United States, right? Or I would even say like there's certain periods that I would, well, the problem with that is it was also during a civil war, so the living conditions were bad. But still, I would say if they won, probably. God, I've completely gone off topic completely. We're not even talking about the debate anymore. We need to get back on topic.
Maintained its pre-invasion borders, and Ukraine maintained its pre-invasion borders. So the other way we can get that now that the invasion actually has happened is with overwhelming firepower, which thankfully we have the money and the means to send Ukraine. And thanks to us, they seem to be able to do it. Given enough time, it genuinely seems like Ukraine will be able to restore its pre-2014 borders before the annexation of Crimea, which is good.
The Soviet Union was better for minorities than America. If we're talking about when the Soviet Union was founded to its end, it was better most certainly for like black people, but there's also not many black people in the Soviet Union. Was it better for Ukrainians? Depends on the time period, but I would say there's probably certain periods of time where that was the case. Probably after Stalin's death. Probably, yeah, after Stalin's death. But it wasn't better for minorities. Like, if we're specifically black, who suffered more? Black people versus Ukrainians. Epic rap battles of his. We're done. We're not doing this anymore. This is optics suicide.
Because we both disagree with the Russian invasion, we must agree with the Russian invasion losing, especially since the Ukraine actually has the means of bringing this about, no?
Well, I mean, you nicely articulated a common understanding of how to interpret the situation. So what'll happen is most people who are, other than the genuinely pro-Russia, partisans out there, which obviously exist. I'm always called a pro-Russian partisan or a Putin apologist or whatever, every name under the sun to that effect. I guess, my having condemned in moral terms the initiation of the invasion doesn't save me from that accusation in any way. So what are you going to do? But anybody who basically just follows a sort of simple moral instinct and expresses opposition to the moral justifiability of Russia having launched the war. That's hold on, I'm explaining it. That's then fallaciously kind of leveraged to say, okay, therefore, because you have an initial moral opposition to the launching of the war itself, that means you're somehow kind of eternally obligated to support every pro-war or pro-intervention measure that the United States, NATO, or whomever decides to launch. And that's not a logical leap that I would contend is at all adequately founded on any kind of basis of logic.
Between Russia and Ukraine. Supplying arms to one side in a war is not the same as joining that war. If that was the case, then, well, nations have been supplying weapons to allied nations for literally as long as countries have existed, and before the idea of the modern state. This goes back to like imperial days. So the idea that supplying arms to an ally is some kind of faux pas just doesn't make sense to me. If we do not support Russia's war effort, we should support Ukraine's.
Wait, okay, so I don't know if you're aware of this or if you saw this news item. Now, of course, a lot of people speculated that it seemed likely that there were U.S. special forces on the ground in Ukraine.
I've seen no evidence of this at all.
Sorry?
I've seen zero evidence that there are any U.S. soldiers in Ukraine.
Well, we have special forces in the country, but it's not like we have like 10,000 soldiers. We have like probably like 100 to like 300, and they're literally like, your job is to recover this person who has been kidnapped, or it's like assassinate this person. That's what I would assume, right? We definitely have spies in the country, but we don't have like a division fighting on the front lines, if that's what people are suggesting. We probably got like 50 like of the hardest hardcore like knife in the mouth assassins in the country doing what they do best, right? Which is probably similar to what the Soviet Union had in Vietnam during our intervention there, which they 100% had.
Let me give you all the evidence you need, because this was reported in the Intercept just last week.
In combat. Wait, hold on. In combat.
Let me just finish.
Not in like direct combat. It's gonna be like these like special operations. Like we're gonna go assassinate this one guy who's like doing this one particularly bad thing, or is like integral to like Russian command. That's the type of stuff we're probably engaged in, which is similar to like the Soviet Union did a lot of stuff in Vietnam and tested a lot of. Oh, I don't know if I can say. Has this? No, this information technically hasn't been declassified. I don't know if I can even say this, actually. You get in some rooms with some really interesting people. I should shut my mouth. Oops, never mind. I said too much.
Let me just finish. The Intercept reported last week that Joe Biden had issued what's called a presidential covert action finding to authorize the deployment, yes.
This was a good article that he's mentioning, by the way. It's in the Intercept. It was written by Ken Clipperstein and some other guy, I forget. It's a good article. You should go read it. It talks about the CIA's early failures in the war, which they amounted to having a lot of technical intelligence, which means we're able to predict when the invasion would happen. But due to a lack of human intelligence, that means spies in the Russian military, stuff like that, we weren't able to properly like find out what was the will to fight exactly and how bad the corruption was. And that's part of the reason why we thought Ukraine was going to fall so quickly, and they didn't. It's very hard to gauge exactly how strong Ukrainian will to fight was. It's a very like hard thing to measure.
Of boots on the ground, U.S. military operations inside Ukraine itself physically. Now, we don't have a whole lot of factually verified insight into what they're doing. You can draw inferences because they're engaging in this whole armament provision process, and we know that the U.S. actually is operationally coordinating combat action with the Ukraine government. But we don't know, it's true, with exact precision what they're actually doing. But we do know that they're probably wearing boots. That's probably fair to say. And they're probably walking on the ground rather than levitating in slippers. So there are U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. I'm just curious what you make of that in terms of what it entails about whether the U.S. is involved in the war.
Of course we're involved in the war. We've been supplying them arms and coordinating movements with them. However, that is not the same.
Dylan, working for the CIA is my favorite arc. I will never confirm or deny exactly the organizations I work for. But what I will say is that it's not even like working with the CIA that I get a lot of interesting information about the Soviet Union that's still not declassified. I know a lot of people, well, not a lot, but I know some people who used to be Soviet officials, right? You get to know them. Most of them don't remember the Soviet Union too fondly, but they're like, look, it was a system there at the time, and we had to do what we had to do to advance what it was like in Ukraine. And they say things that are technically not public knowledge. And since it's not my place to say these things, I don't say these things. But they share it with me. I don't share it with you. You get the idea.
Military participation. Many countries are involved.
There's just a lot of information that's never been technically published. Like it'll be slipped out in bar talk, but it's never like public information. You get what I'm saying? Dylan, you're at the strip club again. Logan, why are you always watching my stream in the strip club? Why are you at the strip club? Okay? Come to Ukraine, Pick up a rifle. I'm
Burns is
kidding. I'm
an
kidding. I'm kidding.
immoral,
Logan, thank you for giving a
corrupt,
tier 1 sub to
man.
Hawkeye. What do we? We're gonna get big. You put my stream up on the strip club TV. Have it playing in the background as she's spraying her cheeks. Okay.
In this war.
Burns.
Operation Coordinating
Hey, Jub Dobbs Howland. Thank you so much for the tier 1. Love your work, Dylan. Please keep it up. Thank you. Thank you.
Combat missions is different from direct participation in what sense? Just because it's not like a formal deployment of like the entire
If the sharing of resources and information.
Hey, Bastion of House Stark. Thank you for gifting a tier 1 sub to Trek Quick 64. Appreciate it. Dylan, keeping Soviet secret proofs how he's anti-freedom. True. Hey, we got a hype train. That's pretty cool. Hey, if you want to support the channel, you know, this stuff here in Miami is pretty expensive. Definitely expensive compared to Ukrainian prices. But I want to go back to Ukraine in January. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I've spent most of my savings on this Ukraine trip. And I'm going to need money to go back. And so I'm going to rely on you guys to fund me going back to Ukraine so I can interview more people and do more work. So any donations, subs, or anything you drop in this channel is going to go into an account which I use to go back to Ukraine, hopefully in January, depending upon the conditions on the ground. So, you know, any donations, if you got any Twitch primes, you can drop them free of charge and go to the site and give subs on the site chat, which you should already be on the site chat anyway, dylanburns.tv, go to the site. And you can drop gift subs, drop donations, and Amazon takes 0 cut, goes 100% to the channel. Would greatly appreciate it.
Entailed actively declaring war, then every war ever would be a total world war. You realize that, right? Like Syria would have been World War III.
You realize that people make the exact same argument about the U.S. intervention in Vietnam. I'm not doing whataboutism. I'm just saying that the reason why that U.S. intervention in that war escalated in the way it did was because the initial deployment of U.S. military forces was not cast as like an official war deployment, right?
We're not talking about an official declaration. Michael,
and you know that's sort of a similar trick they're trying to pull today. Yeah.
The sharing of resources and intel is not.
Hey, Soup God, thank you so much for the tier with the Prime, actually, getting us to level 2 of the hype train.
Not the same as direct military conflict. If
No,
it was, then Syria would have been World War III. Every country, every conflict.
Dog, we literally like blew up. Fucking Wagner boys in Syria and got away with it because it was mostly their fault anyway. It's weird how many actual like direct confrontations like world powers can have. Kind of. It was technically through a private military company, which made it technically not direct, but very obviously would be considered direct military confrontations, if we've been honest, that world powers have, that we all just kind of ignore. And if we ignore it enough, then for Russia and America it goes away and we don't need to like escalate militarily. And the Wagner group getting blown up in Syria is a great example of that, by the way. Why am I saying by the way? I gotta stop saying that. Theodore Rush, thank you for the Prime Gaming.
There are different nations involved, like in 50 conflicts around the world. Every country would have belligerent lists that would run down the entire length of a Wikipedia scroll bar. Obviously, things aren't treated that way. If you want to pretend that us coordinating intel and offering weapons is direct U.S. involvement, then fine, that can be your special definition, and I'll go with it because I'm fine with it.
Whether you want to call it direct involvement or operational coordination of Ukraine's war,
then I'm fine. I'm
pro those things. It's not the same. That's sort of that would be a ridiculous oversimplistic.
Also, I'm looking at the article that you referenced, and what is this?
Let me say,
secret U.S. ops in Ukraine are being conducted under a presidential covert action finding. Current and former officials said. This Intercept article doesn't cite any specific officials. They just.
I believe that Ken Klippenstein is being honest, and I also believe this is happening. And to be completely honest, I hope it's happening, right? But also, this is not completely out of the realm of what Russia would expect, or we would expect of Russia and in similar circumstances if the roles were reversed. So this isn't going to lead to World War III. There's a reason why Putin never talks about American covert actions in Ukraine. The reason why they don't never talk about it is because this is assumed to be happening anyway. And if Russia makes that the standard for World War III when we do it, then when they do it other places, they can't complain if we escalate to that level. And we're quite frankly more powerful than Russia, so we would have more opportunities to do so. Like more opportunities to like escalate to that level with more power behind us, more power backing us.
just say current and former officials? What am I supposed to make of
is
that?
not reliable.
I think I think Dylan knows something. No, I don't know anything.
It varies. Also, why would they not cite anything?
Hey, Sheeran, thank you so much for the tier 1 subscription. You're very pog. Vaush is saying, why would they not cite anything? Because they don't want to give up their sources. They cannot say which U.S. official is saying this, because then they can endanger their job. But they have some dedication to reporters for some reason, or to journalism, that they are saying it publicly, which I'm thankful for, because I don't think this undermines U.S. security anyway, since, like, we're assuming to be doing this anyway, right? I would assume we would be doing this anyway. Like, did we all think really there was no American agents in Ukraine doing the tango, you know, doing the Congo, you know, dancing around, Fortnite dancing? Of course they were. Of course they were. I would assume most people would know this. Like, that was probably going on, right? The Soviet Union did the same thing all across the world as well. The KGB did those types of operations all the time during the Cold War. Russia's doing those operations currently around the world as well. Allison Ainvey with a tier 1 subscription on the site chat, showing that this person is obviously amazingly based, right? They said, move my sub from Twitch to your site to get more of the money. Keep up the good work. That is a based strategy. Even if you don't get our emotes on all the other Twitch channels, you still give more cut to the content creator, which is the most based thing of all.
Here, they're just saying, like, people say
it's very sensitive information. So, you know, under those narrow circumstances, oftentimes journalists conclude that it's justified to use anonymous sources.
Yeah.
Michael's right here. Vaush actually took an L on this one. I'm gonna be for real. Vaush has been doing good the whole debate, but he took an L on this. Not an L on, like, this could escalate to nuclear war because our troops are on the ground. Of course we're doing this. Russia knows we're doing this, but they don't complain about it publicly, or, like, use it as a reason to do nuclear threats. Why? Because it's like who cares? Like, I mean, obviously they care, but, like, of course we're doing it. The rumors on state TV that they're saying NATO super soldiers are making them lose all these battles, that's a different claim, because they're playing footage of, like, the Foreign Legion fighting, which those aren't NATO soldiers, those are foreign volunteers. I've met many of those soldiers shown in those videos. They're good people. Many of them I even consider my friend. But they're not NATO super soldiers. They're people who of their own free will decided to come to Ukraine and fight for freedom.
I actually am going to say that I'm going to doubt the intercept
capriciously, but in narrow cases like this, there can be a justification for it.
Okay, well, in this case, I'm going to say that I won't believe it until more credible info backs it up. A former CIA officer.
I believe it's happening, by the way. I would say it's probably happening. Honestly, if it isn't happening, I would be kind of angry at U.S. officials for not doing it. So I hope it's happening.
Told The Intercept that Biden's use of the pre-existing finding had frustrated some intelligence officers who believe the U.S. involvement should be. There's, like, I could have typed this.
So you think The Intercept is just so journalistically delinquent that they
I've
would
had
have
tons of disagreements with
This is a terrible hill for Vaush to die on, man. This right here is a terrible hill for Vaush to die on. I have no reason to believe the Intercept would lie. I mean, if there's, like, a crazy claim being made, then I'd be like, okay, maybe it's hard. I mean, then you would just really, it would depend on the news agency's reputation. But, like, this isn't even that crazy of a claim. Like, I assume this was going on anyway.
Some guy on the internet would have sent them something and they would just print it without even doing any kind of checking or corroboration.
Wait, I've had huge disagreements with The Intercept before, 100%. Yeah, I don't trust them that much.
On factual issues, meaning like you accuse them of fraudulent reporting?
I didn't say fraudulent reporting. I said I disagree with their reporting. They might have. Reporting? I don't understand why what I'm saying is so difficult for you to understand. I don't fully trust them.
You're saying the factual reporting is not credible enough to go off.
Yes, so I doubt their full credibility. I need more evidence before, like, I'll just believe some crazy shit.
But the problem is it's being strenuously concealed. I mean, that's part of the point.
Okay, it's very special top secret
of this U.S. war operation, if you want to call it direct involvement or operational coordination or what have you. One of the problems with it, at least so far as I've seen, is an extreme lack of transparency, or at least.
What do you mean? Like, look, most of our stuff is transparent, and now this is public knowledge, like what he's talking about, which we probably should have assumed anyway. But, like, what are we gonna say? So we have these many spies in the country. We have these many soldiers in the country. These are the operations they're engaged in. But we might as well just tell the Russians their names. Yeah, when we talk about special secret operations and spying, this is like the one area where the government is going to rightfully not be that communicative for exactly what's going on. Obviously, they shouldn't be doing evil stuff, but you kind of undermine your spying efforts, and you undermine the capacity of these forces to do what they're doing in support of Ukraine, to either whether it's training forces within the country or escorting politicians or defending Zelensky and his personal guard, whatever they're doing. It undermines their ability when the Russians know the information about exactly what they're doing. Like, I think for this specific type of stuff, like, this is like the one area where you would expect most governments to not be transparent. There's a reason why most governments would never, ever give up this information willingly. And it's public knowledge now. So let's debate whether this is good or not. Like, I say it's good.
Actual imposition of secrecy.
So again, since you're so good at moving away from the point at hand here,
well, what's the point I moved away from?
I think it's good that Ukraine can defend itself against a bad invasion.
Even if it requires, like, say, U.S. state deception to achieve
allies aid.
Well, spying is inherently deception, so yes. But, like, who cares? Like, spying has always happened. If you don't spy as a country, then you're probably just getting spied on and acting like a nunce. Is nunce or dunce? Ooh, oh, real Latin. Yeah, like, spying is inherently deception. The art of spying, the art of information warfare is deception, yeah.
Hating them, yes. I like it when allies work together. It's like a power of friendship.
I don't want us to lie about war crimes or cover up atrocities or stuff like that, but, like, spying inherently is going to require lying.
Even if it involves some state deception on the part of the U.S.
What
You're okay
deception? Wait, first of all, I want to...
Yes, my answer would be yes. And Hassan, I just called Vaush Hassan. Vaush should say yes. Vaush should say yes. Spying, of course, all nations do spying. Spying can be used for good things. Spying inherently requires lying and deception. I think it's fine. We spied and did deception during World War II, and that was perfectly fine then. It's okay to spy and do deception now as well. As long as that deception doesn't cover up war crimes and atrocities and stuff like that.
To be clear, because you're very selectively weaponizing this. Literally all international discourse between nations involves degrees of secrecy for national security reasons. This has always been the case and always will. Under capitalism,
the jobs of journalists is just trying to write about the government's doing, especially on issues of war and peace, which are among the most significant.
Under capitalism.
Wait, did Makuzia just donate $50 and I just completely missed it like a moron? Did I miss that? Did I miss Makuzia donate $50 in site chat? Apparently, Danabo told me that Makuzia donated $50 and it didn't pop up for some reason. So I just want to say, Makuzia, thank you for the $50. If you're not here, I'm very sorry. Thank you so much. Like, unironically. Thank you. Thank you. I missed it. I missed it completely. I'm very sorry. Thank you, Makuzia. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Socialism, feudalism, nations are always going to have stuff that's deemed top secret. It's just the way that stuff like this works. Military operations, whether they're
Biden secretly authorizes military operations in Ukraine. That's just the way it goes because states like to keep
Michael,
secrets.
So wait, please stop getting upset. I'm stating a fact right now. Do you disagree with the fact that all nations require some degree of secrecy when it comes to international and military operations? That is a fact of large, just any kind of operation.
Only an idiot would disagree that states employs secrecy in the conduct of their military operations or their intelligence.
Okay, so we agree this is a universal factor.
Whether it ought not to be ascertained whether, for example, Joe Biden.
Michael, why can you never just answer a question?
This is like a silly discussion. Like, of course we're doing it. I don't really care that much. It's not. This is not going to be the thing that escalates to nuclear war. If anything escalates to nuclear war, it's not going to be like 50 special operators being active in Ukraine, which Russia probably assumes we're doing anyway, as we would assume Russia is doing, and many of our foreign endeavors across the globe as well, as happened throughout the Cold War and happened before the Cold War and after the Cold War. China does the same thing.
Michael,
from the public.
Michael, once more, you agree that this is just an inevitable thing that nations do, and that with no exceptions, every nation has engaged in some degree of secrecy when it comes to military.
D5D2D Derek $5. Vaush made a minor mistake saying he didn't believe Intercept, but it didn't even matter because Michael Tracey is such a buffoon.
True. Nobody is going to give him too much shit for it, because even if the story's probably true, and I don't have any reason to doubt the Intercept, and I would be angry if the story wasn't true, to be quite frank when it comes to that. I also think Ken Klipperstein is a good journalist. Like, it seems that Michael is kind of like fumbling the ball on whether we should be doing that, and like the rest of his points. So yeah, you're true. It didn't really have much of an impact, if any. And I don't think Michael made a good enough of a point on it either. Like, I think Michael could have like grilled him a lot more on it.
International geopolitical engagement. There are various reasons for doing so. I'm not saying all of them are good or justified.
Honestly, if I was Michael, I would have never give that up. Like, honestly, the Intercept, this is how journalists do this all the time. You've 100% done stories of a similar style where U.S. officials say, and they didn't give their name. This is how reporting has been done for generations, Vaush. What do you mean? Like, if I go to your channel right now, I'm probably going to find at least 30 to 40 videos where you did a whole video based off of secret U.S. government sources that have been sourced by the Washington Post, by the New York Times, by any number of credible, The Economist, Financial Times, by DW, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and you're gonna you're gonna make that stance here? What's wrong with Ken Klipperstein? Are you saying Ken Klipperstein is a liar? We can get Ken Klipperstein probably in here. I would never let him live that down if I was in Michael's position, unironically. There is no source, so it's worthless until it's confirmed. What do you... Okay. They say the source is U.S. officials. There's no way they're going to say the U.S. official, right? U.S. official is named Stephen Bonelli or whatever his name is, right? They're not going to say that. There's a ton of reports that have come out like this. John Bolton actually wrote in... whatever. There's like a million stories like this. I don't want to get too much into this. We're kind of getting off track. But all I'm saying is Michael could have done really good work with this if he really wanted to. Are you going to try to set up a debate with Michael Tracey? No. If you guys ask Michael to talk to me, I will talk to Michael. I will have a polite discussion with him. I don't think he's completely insane, even if I think he's wrong. I think he's very different than, say, somebody like Partisan Girl or like Hinkle or like these people who are just clowns. I do think there's some genuineness in there, even if I think he's wrong. And I think I could have a conversation with him. I would just disagree with him heavily. And the thing is, I would bite the bullet on the thing Vaush isn't, and then I would say we should do it anyway. And so I think we would be able to have a discussion about this specific part of it if we wanted to.
I support journalistic transparency, but you agree this is a literally ubiquitous thing.
My question would be, do you think America should have had like spies and special operators operating within France before we entered the war? My answer to that would have been yes.
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert on every country in the world.
Michael, you can. Are you
the country?
It's like a Romani curse keeps you from answering yes/no questions.
I'm going to answer.
Wait, just an answer now, comma, then clarify. Yes or no?
I'm not doing a yes or no thing like
it's a curse.
Okay? I can answer questions with, I don't know, 3 sentences.
It is a yes/no question. You can. So it is actually possible to give a yes/no answer and then clarify.
I'm most familiar with. It's true. Has often entailed an enormous amount of deceit in its conduct. So yeah, that does appear to be a seeming inevitability of U.S. policy, which is all the more reason why maximum transparency should be striven toward as regards this Ukraine intervention.
Well, apparently one of the American officials agreed with you, made this statement public. Now we know. We're not going to know exactly what operations they're engaged with, but like, that's like, what you expect them to say? Okay, guys, next Tuesday we're gonna assassinate. Like, what? Like, I don't like, what level of transparency do you want? If our military, if our spies and our special operation forces were completely transparent, then they couldn't get any job done. They'd all would be captured, murdered, and they would all end up dead in a ditch because they wouldn't be able to operate without some veil of secrecy.
Okay, so once more. Now that we've acknowledged that there's always some degree of secrecy when it comes to the exact kind of operations we're talking about, we can stop bringing up the secrecy as evidence that it's somehow bad. What we're talking about is the actions itself.
Fallacious leap you just
I am
made, but
uninterested in you like deflecting from every question with like, okay,
deflecting just because I don't capitulate to your yes
to
or
my
no
questions. Yes, to answering my questions.
2 sentences.
Not capitulating to answering questions is a synonym to deflection.
Yes or no question that for with an answer that's not conducive to literally one word. Yeah, that would be a capitulation.
You can answer with a yes or a no and then clarify it for more info. I've done that multiple times. Like, yes, I'm in support of the U.S. providing aid, comma, because X and Y. Like, that's how people talk when they move their mouths. They can say words that add substance.
Okay.
Most people talk
No need to be condescending, Raj. Reel it in. You're undermining yourself.
when they're like just talking and they want to like
people
arrive
don't
at
answer yes/no questions.
All of a sudden, introduce ultimatums where it's like yes or no. Respond yes or no. That's not usually how people talk.
The people do say, dude, you're being unclear. Can you just give me a yes or no answer? Because I can't get to my next question if you don't answer this. So just for the conversation's sake, can you answer yes or no? I think most people would say, okay, I can do that. Well, unless you're trying to avoid it for some reason. You can give like yes, no, but I need you to know this before you say anything else. This is important context for my answer. You can do that. Like, you can easily give context to your answer. You can answer the question. I think he's just choosing not to.
Talk at least.
Oh, people don't ask yes/no questions and get weirded out when you refuse to answer.
Like, all of a sudden introduce these like ultimatum style yes or no demands to like remove any potential elaboration on the subject, which is kind of ridiculous.
Well, so you're not being removed potential elaboration. I'm saying you can follow the yes or no up with additional info, elaboration.
Okay. I will say no, comma. The tendency of states, especially the United States, which I'm most familiar with the foreign policy of, to impose secrecy as pertains to its military operations or its intelligence operations. No, to me, that does not, N-O-T, have anything to do with justifying somehow the legitimacy of the operations today, nor does it prevent, nor should that the tendency of states to impose such secrecy somehow diminish the imperative to adequately ascertain the reality of what the U.S. military operations are.
And I fully agree. I'm fully in support of journalistic transparency and getting as much info as we can.
So
my primary concern here
should publish the finding of the presidential covert action finding that he.
So yeah, I looked through that article.
God, Vaush, please don't attack the article anymore. Please don't. That's your worst point.
Publish it, right?
I don't even think the article says what you think it says. It talks about amending a previous.
What you think it says? Have you read it before to the stream?
I just read it right now while you were
live on the stream. Okay, I read it prior to being on a Twitch stream.
That's very impressive.
So I'm aware that it says Biden issued it's effectively an order. It's called a presidential covert action finding, where it's like a written statement authorizing certain secret military operations. In fact, interestingly, one of the most notorious examples of this ever being done was in 1985 when Ronald Reagan signed the exact same type of order to initiate, what were then technically illegal transport of weapons to Iran. Iran-Contra affair, as later became to be known. So there you go. That's what you don't care about secret U.S. military operations. No, I do. That's
you're fully correct. Right now, I don't, because we're talking about an ongoing war where people are dying, and I care about whether Ukraine wins or loses that war.
So if that finding,
can you ever just stick to the topic?
And you could tell Biden, release it or don't, you would say don't release it?
What? Tracy, the only article that I've seen here is something with it's an Intercept article with no sources.
So let's say that does exist.
Michael, please, Michael, stop, Michael, calm down, Michael. I did not say, Michael, please, Michael. I never said I didn't want it released. I just said I like journalistic transparency. However, whether the contents of the article are true or not, it doesn't change the fact that I support U.S. support for Ukraine. I want Ukraine to win. I want Ukraine. So wait, if we could just talk about anything in reality for a moment. I want Ukraine to beat back Russia.
Right now, according to the
Michael. I want Ukraine to beat back Russia.
What is your first name, by the way? I don't even know. Maybe I'll keep repeating it just to.
It's Ian.
Echo you. Is it? What is it?
It's Ian.
Okay. Good.
Now, I want Ukraine to push back to the border that Russia invaded against. And the reason I want this is because I don't like it when fascist countries do annexations for land grabbing and a variety of reasons involved. So I support the mechanisms by which Ukraine is fighting for its freedom.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you mind if I ask you a quick question? Is that acceptable?
Sure.
Okay. So, and let's just, there's so much going on even just within the past, 2 weeks or something. I think we should probably bring it more to the present because we started with World War II and then we did, the invasion starting.
Give me a yes/no question. I'll show you how it's done.
No, I don't actually particularly want to ask you a yes/no question because I'm not trying to impose any ultimatums on you or anything. I actually want you to explain your views at, in a reasonable length. So what I wanted to ask you was, you must have seen this reporting last week. The New York Times published an article where they were reporting that the U.S. intelligence agencies had found, and clearly this was leaked to the New York Times, which is
Arnie, thanks for the 100
much always where the U.S. intelligence services will leak kind of public pronouncements like this. According to U.S. intelligence services, the Ukraine government was responsible for committing and did commit an assassination terror bombing outside of Moscow in August, where the daughter of this philosopher Dugin was killed. I'm sure you're familiar with the incident.
Yeah,
last week. So the assassination terror bombing you're saying was dope.
Of the
I'd love you to elaborate on that.
State official? Yeah.
Daria Dugin was not a state official, but she was like a state commentator. She would came on state media, she was like a state guest commentator. I think would be the closest you could tie her to the state and in through her father's career. But being the daughter, whatever. So the closest you can get her directly to the state would be would be that she was a state guest commentator. Then after that you would get into all the terrible stuff she did, the dehumanization of Ukrainians. The calling for war crimes, the all the terrible stuff. I don't think I'll ever really fully wholeheartedly endorse what happened, but I'm 100% not that upset about it. She worked for state media. She was a state guest commentator. Are you talking about the Eurasian news outlet she worked for? Because as far as I know, she would be invited onto shows to do state commentary. I know she wrote for some Eurasian outlet that her father was part of. I don't know if that's state media.
So that would have been
state official? Was the daughter a state official?
She was. She worked for state.
What was her state job?
She was a publisher in state media. A pretty high up one as well.
No, she was not a pretty high up one. She was more well known than the average person. But as far as I don't think she was was she a publisher? I don't think she was a publisher. Dragon Who's, thank you to Tier 1 to beat up for 13 months, currently on a 9-month streak. She worked for RT and a media station owned by the Wagner Group owner. Okay, if she did work for RT, that wouldn't be that surprising. But as far I knew her from her work on the Eurasian outlet her father owned, and as being a sometimes common state commentator, guest commentator that'd be invited on.
She was employed by the Russian government?
Yeah, yes, she worked for state media.
As far as I know, I'll have to double check. Either way, she did talk on state media, but as a guest commentator for at bare minimum, she might have. If you guys are saying she did work for RT, then I just check her Wikipedia article. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Daria Dugin. I gotta go in a second, boys, because I want to go eat food. Career in activism, Russian invasion of Ukraine. She worked as a journalist, writing for the state media. Oh, okay. She did work for RT. And Tsargrad. Oh, yeah. Tsargrad 100% is probably. And of course, this is what I know. She's affiliated with the International Eurasian Movement and worked for them as a paid political commentator. Okay, she did work for state media then. Okay. I don't know if that. At least she was at the very least a state contractor in publishing media, which in effect, is there a difference? Not really.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have to.
She wasn't
double
just
check.
the daughter of Dugan.
My understanding was
Wait,
that
did
she
you
was
not?
a
Did you not
civilian.
know that she wasn't just the daughter? If she was just a civilian, then I.
Damn, he was fumbling it and then he recovered it. He fumbled. Vaush fumbled at the start. Then Michael fumbled harder, erasing Vaush's fumble. That's what just happened.
Would have thought that was heinous, but no, she was a genocidal fascist state official who published articles that were, let's say, ethnically critical.
Ontario Rockhound, thank you for the tier 1 beats up for 3 months. I like what you're doing in Ukraine. Keep up good work and spread the awareness. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's say she was a state official. I don't know that to be true. I have to double check it. My understanding was that she was a civilian and she was like, was in published books and stuff.
It would have been
like
it would have been like if the French resistance.
Let's say she was a state official. You would think it's dope to launch an assassination if it was a state official?
Wait, if like the French resistance had assassinated one of like Hitler's propaganda? Wait. So don't ask me a question, then keep me from answering.
Wait, okay. Michael Tracey can't complain about needing to answer yes or no questions. Then Vaush tries to not answer in a yes or no manner, similarly to how he answers, and then he complains. That feels kind of hypocritical.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like if the French resistance or the Jewish resistance within Germany had assassinated like Himmler, or like one of their propaganda ministers, yeah, I would have totally supported that. They're not just like like an unaffiliated civilian.
This woman that was killed is roughly comparable to a Himmler.
Well, no, she would have been like one below.
I don't know Himmler. I think it would be. I think he means Goebbels, not Himmler. But I think I get what he's saying.
Himmler. Well, I don't know the direct comparison and the relative.
Himmler is the most evil person in the entirety of like the Nazi regime when it comes to higher ranking officials. He's like the most clear embodiment of evil, but I think he meant Goebbels, who was a propaganda minister. And no, she's not equivalent to Goebbels. She would be equivalent to like a Nazi press outlet commentator who wrote articles for like the Nazi newspaper that gets put out. That would be her, like, I guess, equivalent in Nazi terms.
That seems like a bit of a stretch to be based on the facts that I'm aware of.
Sorry, Goebbels, not Himmler.
I know more about her like operational involvement in the Russian government and like maybe her military import or something. And I'll have to do some more research on that once we're off the stream.
Yeah, sorry. I meant Goebbels, not Himmler. But yeah, propaganda.
Okay, so why do you think it is then that the U.S. intelligence services put out this information publicly? And
probably because they were not given information about, well, if Ukraine did it, which I'm not still 100% sold on, by the way, because the Russian line on it was complete nonsense. The idea that like an Azov spy with her daughter and cat crossed the border into Russia, then went to Moscow, stayed there for a month before planting the bomb, killing Dugina, then fled to Estonia, not before leaving Azov battalion propaganda in her hotel, her ID, and all identifiable documents to give them a direct paper trail. But then there was evidence of Photoshop on the ID. And they got all this information within 48 hours. At the same time, the National Republican Army, NRA, this supposed Russian resistance group, was claiming the attack at the same time. I feel like it is possible that Ukraine did this, but I think that Russia lied about what they knew in order to blame Ukraine a lot faster than they could have if they did a thorough investigation.
Said that they had chastised or reprimanded the Ukraine government for taking this action because they don't think it's dope for the assassination to have been committed.
Well, maybe I'm more passionate about anti-fascism than the U.S. government.
Oh, okay. So the key difference between you and the U.S. government is you're more passionately anti-fascist and hence more inclined to openly support assassination terror bombings. Okay, I got it.
Fascist state officials.
I don't know if it was the word terror bombing is kind of like has a lot of weight on it. It certainly was an assassination. I mean, it was meant to terrify, I think, Russian state actors into like, we will strike you, whether it was the NRA or it was Ukraine or whoever did it. So I guess you could use the word, but I think there's like a lot of that's implied there as like terrorism and but like, yeah, I guess you could use that word.
Officials who are complicit in an invasion of a neighboring country.
Perfectly kind of intelligible and universalizable criteria for who's a quote fascist who deserves to be assassination car bombed. Okay.
Well, he should not get into debate about Dugina's beliefs because you could easily justify her being a fascist, but it would be much more difficult for Vaush to try to justify the bombing.
That wasn't even the
yeah.
point I was bringing up. So
Again, it's like Vaush will fumble and then Michael will just fumble harder. That's what it keeps happening.
we got so you.
I can't believe you didn't know that she
was
worked
we
in
got that.
journalism.
Why do you think it is then that when top Ukraine officials, like top advisor to Zelensky in the president's office in Ukraine, when after this attack took place in August, obviously he addressed it on state television in Ukraine, and he vehemently denied that Ukraine carried out the attack because he said if it had carried out the attack, that would have made Ukraine a terrorist state, and Ukraine is not a terrorist state. Then, U.S. intelligence services about 6 weeks later charge that the Ukraine government did, in fact, carry out that attack. So why would that Ukraine government official have denied doing it on the grounds that it would have meant that Ukraine is a terrorist state if the assassination?
Because it's bad PR for Ukraine, so they lied. Like it's like that would be the answer, really. If they did it, which we don't know for sure, just because America thinks they did it and Russia thinks they did it, doesn't mean they did it. It increases the likelihood that they did. But again, the case that Russia made was so bad that it still makes me have doubts. But if they did it, they would deny it because they wouldn't want to look bad, because it looks bad. But they did assert that they didn't do it. So, I mean, I don't know if they didn't say if we did it, it would mean we're terrorists. They said, we didn't do it, we're not terrorists like Russia. But I see where he got that from.
Terror bombing was so dope.
Wait, just out of curiosity, where the fuck are we going with this? I don't care about any of this.
So okay.
Like even remotely. I don't care. I don't care whether or not they're trying to do a PR campaign for their assassination. I'm fine with the assassination. What you're telling me that like officials will like deny various military bombings or then like pull it back and then yes, absolutely.
Because it gets to whether an attack like this is worth endorsing, as you have.
I don't care whether they endorse it. I'm endorsing it.
The senior-most officials in the Ukrainian government vehemently declined to endorse it because they said it would mean that Ukraine had committed a terrorist act. And
why the fuck would I care what Ukrainian officials endorse?
I thought you were a passionate supporter of Ukraine.
I am of Ukraine winning against Russia. I don't look to Ukrainian officials for moral guidance on my beliefs. If you're trying to catch me in a gotcha, you're not going to. It's not going to work.
I'm not trying to catch you in a gotcha. I'm genuinely
trying to understand. You're like, oh, can you explain to me why this one official one time said that the thing that they did would have been bad if it came out and they did it?
View within the Ukraine government when they were made to it.
I don't care. I don't look to them for my ethics.
Okay, good.
It's Aristotle, Plato, and Zelensky.
It's a great PR thing because they actually did think it was dope.
I don't care if they thought it was dope. I mean, they did it, so clearly some of them think it was pretty dope. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, you and I just seem to basically differ on the dopeness of assassination, terror bombings
of fascist state officials conducting an invasion. Yeah. I mean, you can complain about that. You can like use whatever term.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of virtue. Okay, I think I'm gonna probably end this in like a second or two because I'm gonna go downstairs and like drink like a bunch of rum. Okay, I'm gonna be for real. But I'm at a libertarian conference. Libertarians know how to drink. The thing is, this is just like virtue signaling on top of virtue signaling. It's like, yeah, you support terror bombings, assassination attempts on state officials, and he's like, yeah, fascist state officials invading another is like virtue signal, virtue signal, virtue signal. It's like, okay, this isn't getting nowhere. They should move on, to be completely honest.
Terminology. Do you think it would have been bad for like propaganda ministers in Germany to get murked?
Sorry?
Do you think it would have been bad for propaganda ministers under Nazi Germany to get murked during World War II? Like if resistance figures bombed their cars?
I mean, I'm sure, in like occupied France.
Oh, it's another yes/no question. I made a mistake asking it.
Yeah. Sorry, I need like a 12-word sentence to answer. I don't doubt that there could have been like a militarily defensible justification for carrying out an act like that, for example, in occupied France or something. No. I'm just not. This is just kind of
terroristic bombing of
I was referencing why I brought up the World War II subject in the first place, because
this debate shows also why the word terrorism is like nearly worthless in modern discourse. By the way, like it's just thrown around so willy-nilly, and like people don't whatever. I don't want to get too much into that. I don't want to derail.
It always gets analogized. Well, you just did it there to justify something happening right now. Hence my interest in actually probing it.
I do like drawing analogies to make points of that analogy. Yes.
Well, right. That's why I assess the analogy.
Right. So we're cool.
Okay, so then even more recently, we have.
So wait, we're still
of
trying
the
to talk
Crimea
about,
Bridge, right?
if you don't support the Russian invasion, how is Ukraine supposed to win without the assistance of the West? They're a weaker country.
Sorry?
They're a weaker country. Russia has shown itself to be pathetically weak over the course of this invasion, but Ukraine was not, strong enough to defend itself without our help.
Yeah. And by the way, people, I probably am sweating it because I closed my window and it's now getting hot because I wanted to keep out the ambient noise. So if anybody on the internet wants to comment on that, you got me. I probably am sweating at this point.
Didn't notice that at all. But he did bring it to my attention. He is sweating.
That's fine. I embrace it. So you mentioned actually a little while ago, if we were too kind of diligent about scrutinizing which state is a belligerent and which conflict, each conflict would have like 50 state belligerents, right?
I mentioned right now how Ukraine's supposed to win without our help.
But that totally obscures. I'm not saying you're like willfully doing this obscuring, but that sort of logic totally obscures the actual nature of the U.S. role in particular in Ukraine. It's not just that the U.S. is one of many belligerents. The U.S. is almost singularly sponsoring the entire Ukraine war effort, and not just
God, man, I love my country at times, very rarely.
Sponsoring, with financial provision and armament provision, but with diplomatic.
If we
defense.
didn't do that,
the only reason
lose.
Ukraine is even able to I think there's a good case to be made that the only reason why Ukraine is even currently a state is because of the largesse it receives from U.S. Hegemony.
I don't agree with that. I think Russia might have pushed Ukraine back to the river next to Kiev. I think that's probably where they would have pushed them back to. But I don't think Russia, due to just how unbelievably incompetent it is, would have taken all of Ukraine. Plus, there's other actors who could have tried to fill some of the void as well. We're not the entirety of aid. Poland would have probably still supported them. Other nations would have probably supported them.
So it's kind of different than just your run-of-the-mill.
When the Soviet Union fell, they voted pretty unanimously for independence.
No, I meant if like the U.S. hadn't entered into the war, like the war effort, or gotten involved in the war effort post
without us helping, they would have lost. Right. But I don't want them to lose, so I want us to help.
Not just run-of-the-mill belligerent; it's actually like pretty much running the war effort.
Yes,
like it's the prime mover in the entire war. So like
intel and
most belligerents in those conflicts, like according to like akin to what you were referencing, are not like the prime movers in the war in the way that the U.S. is.
I'm fine with us helping Ukraine.
There's no
I
war
want
happening
us
right
to
now,
help
right?
Ukraine.
Right.
It's good. We're doing the good thing. Ukraine is the victim. We're helping the victim. You're tooting the horn of like American moral supremacy right here in a way that I'm frankly, as a socialist, not comfortable with. Yes, we're doing a very good thing right now.
Moral supremacy at all? How did I done that?
Well, I don't know, because
she's being irony, man. But social awareness on the internet is few and far between, even for me, mind you.
You don't answer any questions. How is Ukraine supposed to win without the West's assistance?
Okay. Well, at least let's look at what the policy is now that's supposed to enable Ukraine to win.
Okay, that's it. We're done. We're ending stream. He's not okay. We're done. This is gonna be more of the same. Okay, that's enough of that. I'm gonna go to the bar. I'm gonna go get wasted. I'm gonna go have a good time.